This is a gentle, meditative retelling of a Morty who, after a strange accident in a liminal moment of the multiverse, never opens his eyes again. The story does not dwell on high-stakes action or chaos, but rather on small acts, emotional awakenings, and the surreal, quiet wonder of a universe seen through a Morty whose perception is internal, reflective, and deeply empathetic. We drift through his memories, relationships, and soft, strange adventures, using surreal yet calming imagery to lull the listener towards sleep. He remembered the day it all began, as if it were a soft hum vibrating just beneath his skin. The light outside seemed heavier than usual, golden and liquid, slipping slowly through the blinds and pooling on the wooden floor like warm syrup. It was too bright, yet not painful, only insistently persistent, a gentle insistence that perhaps the world was not quite what it seemed. And in that moment he realized something strange. He could feel a warmth of the sunlight without opening. His eyes, it was a feeling that belonged to no one, and yet it belonged entirely to him. Before we begin the story, I want you to know something important. We truly love and care for you. You are seen in ways you may not even realize, and this story is for your quiet heart. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from and what time is it there? Now grab your coffee, or perhaps a blanket, and let's get started. Morty, though he did not yet know the peculiar path ahead of him, had always been curious about small things that most others overlooked. The pattern of a crack in the sidewalk, the faint scent of electricity in a fridge left open too long, the way a hummingbird's wings made a tiny, secret vibration that traveled through air and bone alike. That day, the sunlight pooled around him like a blanket, and he felt himself dissolve into it, his body a soft impression rather than a sharp form. His mother's voice called from the kitchen, warm but distant, asking if he had eaten, and he replied without opening his eyes, because opening them seemed unnecessary. He had learned early that some things were better felt than seen. The dub crunch of leaves beneath his sneakers in fall, the gentle brush of hair across his forehead when he leaned too close to his sister, the tiny echo of a laugh that lingered even after the sound had disappeared. These were the details he treasured, while the world insisted on demanding more obvious evidence: eyes, lists, check marks, certainty. Morty had never cared for certainty. His father's absence was a soft shadow in the corners of the home, a quiet shape that he could feel but never name. It wasn't sadness that hung there, but a gentle hollowness, a reminder that sometimes people leave and do not return, and that absence itself could be a teacher if one listened closely. Morty had learned to listen, even when words were scarce. And perhaps that is why he noticed the small shift that day, the slight tremble in the floorboards as if the house were breathing, holding secrets beneath its wooden ribs. Rick had arrived. Soon after, as he often did, not with clamor, but with an invisible gravity, a subtle ripple in the air that only those attuned could perceive. He smelled faintly of motor oil and herbs, a combination that made Morty's chest tighten with anticipation and unease. Rick's voice was quiet, almost a whisper, and yet it carried through the room as if the walls themselves were listening. "Morty," he said, and Morty felt the sound more than heard it. "Today, you'll notice something different." Morty's curiosity blossomed in the silence between words. He tilted his head slightly, feeling the weight of the floor beneath him, the whisper of air against his skin. The moment stretched and stretched, elastic and strange, until it seemed that time itself had decided to pause. And then, as if on cue, the shift happened. It was subtle at first, a faint hum beneath his feet, a tickle of air that brushed across his temples, a soft vibration that travelled upward through his chest. He could not see it, could not name it, but he felt it. The multiverse, breathing, waiting, acknowledging him. He tried to open his eyes and found he could not. It was not pain, not fear, only a curious absence, as if the lids themselves had decided to fold inward and rest, leaving the rest of the world visible only to his inner vision. Morty did not panic. He simply tilted his head again, listened, to the house, to the sunlight, to the faint rhythm of Rick's breathing. And in that quiet, he discovered something unexpected. He could feel the presence of everything more intensely than ever before. The backyard smelled like crushed grass and the faint tang of morning dew. A bird trilled somewhere, and Morty felt its tiny heart beat through the distance, a rhythm that matched his own. He could sense the house shifting around him, the warmth of the kitchen, the gentle vibration of dishes stacked in a cabinet. Even the smallest details seemed magnified, the soft scrape of a chair leg, the whisper of a curtain brushing against the window. And in this heightened awareness, Morty felt safe. His mother's voice returned, asking again if he had eaten. Morty smiled inwardly, a quiet warmth spreading through him. He did not need to see her to know her mood, to know the gentle concern in her tone. And perhaps that was the first lesson, that presence did not always require sight. Some things were deeper, quieter, invisible, yet undeniably real. Rick crouched beside him, his hands resting lightly on Morty's shoulders, grounding him in a gentle way. "You'll learn," Rick said softly, "that some things aren't meant to be seen. They're meant to be felt, remembered, understood." Morty nodded, though no one could see. He felt the words settle into him like small stones in a riverbed, grounding, solid, permanent, in a way that neither the sun nor the house could disrupt. And then, without warning, the humming began. Not loud, not startling, just a soft, persistent vibration that seemed to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Morty realized it was coming from him. His heartbeat had found a rhythm with the universe, soft but unmistakable, a quiet echo in the vast, sleeping multiverse. He felt himself stretch ever so slightly, as if his body was expanding outward, reaching toward things he could not name, toward possibilities he did not yet understand. He lay there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, wrapped in the hum, in the warmth, in the light he could feel but not see. The world was vast, silent, and patient, and Morty understood, for the first time, that he did not need to see everything to be part of it. Some knowledge was softer, subtler, more alive. And as he surrendered to the quiet, he discovered that he could listen to the space between moments, the gentle pauses that contained more meaning than any hurried observation could. When Rick finally rose, the vibration subsided, leaving only the gentle warmth of the morning and the residual hum in Morty's chest. Rick looked at him, or perhaps through him, and nodded. No words were necessary. Morty had understood. And as he lay there, feeling the sunlight pool around him, feeling the house breathe and the universe tremble softly, he thought, for the first time, perhaps the eyes were not as important as the heart, the mind, the listening soul. He did not yet know what this would mean, or where it would take him, but in the soft stillness, he felt a profound trust, a quiet hope, a tender curiosity. The world was vast and strange, full of soft mysteries and gentle wonders, and he was awake in ways no one else could see. And so he remained, lying in the golden sunlight, listening to the house, the multiverse, the tiny beats and hums that connected him to everything else. He did not need to open his eyes. He did not need to rush. He only needed to feel, to breathe, to exist, and to be fully present in the gentle, astonishing moment that would mark the beginning of everything. And somewhere, deep inside, he smiled. He smiled. The next morning arrived quietly, without the usual rush or clamor of life insisting itself upon the world. The sunlight seeped through the curtains, softer this time, golden strands brushing across the floorboards, as if the house itself had learned how to tiptoe. Morty lay in the same place he had been yesterday, feeling the warmth spread across his chest and arms, the gentle vibration of the floor beneath him, and the hum of the universe lingering just beneath the surface. He did not open his eyes. There seemed no need. What he felt was already enough. He listened instead as one might listen to a favorite song played in slow motion. The faint creak of a door, the distant chatter of birds, the whisper of leaves outside, every sound carried more weight, more presence, more life than he had ever noticed before. Morty had discovered that mornings could be entire worlds in themselves, places to inhabit without moving, without seeing. And in this stillness, he realized that he loved the quiet. His mother came into the room carrying a small tray, the porcelain cups clinking softly. "Breakfast," she said, her voice warm and low, careful not to disturb the delicate rhythm of his morning. Morty smiled inwardly and felt the tray settle beside him, the faint warmth of the tea and toast brushing against his senses. He did not need to look to know it was there. He reached out, touched the cup, felt the heat spread through his fingers, and brought it slowly to his lips. The taste was simple, comforting, the soft sweetness of honey and bread, a reminder that small things could be profound. Summer appeared shortly after, her presence a lively, familiar vibration. Morty could sense her excitement, a gentle ripple that reached him without words. "Morty," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "You've been lying here all morning. Don't you want to come outside?" Morty considered it, feeling the pull of the day beyond the window through the soft currents of air. He did not answer with words, only with a quiet acknowledgement, a small shift of his body, and Summer understood. She smiled and took his hand, guiding him gently. The backyard was a tapestry of sound and scent. The grass was damp, and Morty could feel the tiny blades brushing against his ankles, cool and persistent. A faint breeze carried the smell of blossoms from a faraway tree, and he imagined the petals drifting lazily in the air, soft as clouds. Summer ran ahead, her laughter a low, rolling echo that Morty could sense rather than hear, vibrating gently in his chest. He followed slowly, step by careful step, savoring the connection to the earth, to the world, to her presence. Rick appeared then, not with his usual chaotic entrance, but quietly, as though the universe had arranged a soft doorway just for him. Morty felt the slight pull of his energy, subtle and complex, wrapping around him like a familiar coat. Rick crouched beside him, his hands brushing against Morty's arms, grounding him without words. "You're learning," he said softly, voice a ripple through the stillness. "You're learning to feel the universe, Morty, and not just see it. There's a difference. You're awake in a way most people will never understand." Morty nodded, though no one could see, and let the words settle into the quiet corners of his mind. He noticed things he had never noticed before. The way the sunlight made small patterns on the stone path, the rhythm of an ant moving methodically. Across a rock, the distant hum of a neighbor's lawnmower that somehow felt like a lullaby. The world was alive, vibrating, whispering in ways that required patience and attention. Morty had discovered patience, not as a task, but as a gift. They sat together for a long time, the three of them, in silence that was warm rather than empty. Morty felt the contours of Summer's presence beside him, the faint energy of Rick, leaning nearby, and the soft, comforting weight of the universe pressing gently against his chest. He could feel the vibration of the air, the subtle dance of molecules, the slow, quiet pulse of life threading through everything. And he understood, in a way that no one else could, that these small, almost imperceptible connections were where meaning resided. Summer leaned her head against his shoulder, whispering stories of the past, adventures, little mishaps, small triumphs, none of which required his eyes to imagine. Morty felt each story as if it were a brush of light across his skin, a gentle warmth settling into his chest. The day stretched and curved around them, not pressing, not urgent, only persistent and patient, full of small wonders that would go unnoticed by anyone else. Later, Rick guided them both to a quiet corner of the yard, where a small, abandoned tree had grown crooked and alone. He gestured for Morty to touch the bark. Morty did so, and the rough texture pressed into his fingertips, grounding him further. Rick hummed softly, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through the ground and into Morty's body. "Trees remember," Rick said. "They remember everything. You can learn from them, Morty, if you listen." Morty tilted his head, feeling the slow, steady heartbeat of the tree, the subtle creak of its branches swaying in the wind. He listened, and in the listening he felt an echo of the multiverse itself. The afternoon drifted lazily into evening. Shadows stretched long across the yard, blending the smells and sounds into one soft, gentle hum. Morty felt the cooling air brush across his skin, carrying with it the faint scent of dinner cooking, of the universe settling into a rhythm that was both immense and intimately small. He realized that he had begun to understand something vital, that life was not always about what one saw, but what one felt, remembered, and carried quietly within. Before dinner, Summer and Morty returned to the kitchen. Morty felt the familiar presence of his family, the warmth of the room, the faint vibration of life moving around him. He did not open his eyes, and yet he could see more clearly than he ever had. He noticed the subtle patterns of movement, the cadence of footsteps, the quiet exchanges of energy that formed the invisible architecture of a home. Rick lingered in the corner, watching, humming softly, a guardian of quiet lessons. Morty felt the soft pull of his guidance, gentle yet persistent, and he understood that the greatest adventures were often the ones that required no movement at all, adventures of perception, of empathy, of stillness. He felt his body relax into the rhythm of the evening, the universe humming softly in concert with his own pulse. That night, as the stars appeared like faint whispers against the dark canvas of the sky, Morty lay in bed and felt the vibration of the world settle into his chest. He did not open his eyes. He did not need to. The universe, in all its quiet majesty, had revealed itself to him, layer by layer, in warmth, in scent, in vibration. And as he drifted towards sleep, he carried with him the small, profound understanding that would guide him for the rest of his days, that the heart could see in ways the eyes never could, and that listening, truly listening, was a kind of magic more wondrous than any adventure outside the skin. And somewhere, As he surrendered to the soft pull of slumber, Morty smiled. The universe hummed with him, a gentle, infinite lullaby, and he felt for the first time that the quiet world, the soft moments, and the unseen patterns of life were enough. More than enough. The next morning arrived without hurry, as if the world itself had decided to linger a little longer in its own soft, patient rhythm. Morty lay in the bed he had grown used to, feeling the faint vibration of the wooden floor beneath the mattress, the slow inhale and exhale of the house settling around him. He did not open his eyes. The world had taught him, in these early hours, that seeing was not always necessary. Feeling, sensing, remembering, these were the real ways to understand the subtle currents that flowed beneath the surface of life. Summer appeared at the doorway, barefoot, her hair falling loose over her shoulders. Morty could feel her excitement before she spoke, the ripple of it brushing against him like a small, warm breeze. "Morty," she said softly, almost whispering, "you should come see this." Morty tilted his head, feeling the tug of curiosity in his chest. He followed her slowly, step by step, letting the world guide him through sensation rather than sight. They entered the backyard, which had transformed overnight in ways Morty could feel but not name. The grass was damp, alive with tiny shivers that ran up through his soles. A faint breeze carried the scent of wildflowers, a mixture of sweetness and earth that pressed gently against his senses. Somewhere, a bird trilled a melody that was both familiar and strange, like a memory long buried but never forgotten. Morty felt the harmony of it all resonate deep within him, and he smiled quietly. Rick appeared behind them, not with his usual clamor or hurried movements, but softly, like a shadow folding into the sunlight. Morty sensed his presence before he heard him, the subtle warmth of familiarity, the calm insistence of someone who understood the universe not just as chaos, but as gentle patterns waiting to be noticed. "Today," Rick said, his voice low and almost melodic, "you'll see the world in a way you haven't before. Not with your eyes, but with everything else." Morty tilted his head again, absorbing the words, letting them settle into the quiet folds of his mind. They reached the old oak tree near the edge of the yard. Morty had noticed it many times before, yet today it seemed different. He ran his fingers along the rough bark, feeling the grooves and ridges, the subtle hum that seemed to echo beneath his touch. He could sense the life coursing through it, the slow, patient pulse of growth and endurance. Summer knelt beside him, tracing the veins of the leaves with her fingers, her energy a soft vibration that intertwined with his own. Morty felt a warmth spread through him, the recognition of connection without words. Rick leaned against the tree, humming softly, a vibration that Morty could feel in his chest. "Everything has a rhythm, Morty," Rick said. "Even trees, even grass, even the air you breathe. If you listen closely enough, you can find it. And if you do, you can understand things most people never notice." Morty closed his eyes fully this time, allowing himself to sink into the vibrations, to follow the pulse of life in every subtle shift of energy around him. He felt the ant crawling along a root, the slow sway of branches above, the faint hum of insects hidden in the leaves. Every movement was a story, every vibration a message. Morty realized that he could sense what it meant to exist without demanding attention, without needing recognition. It was a quiet wisdom, one that spoke not in words, but in understanding. He felt a part of something vast and tender, the universe, folding around him like a soft blanket. Summer laughed quietly, a sound that rippled through the space between them, and Morty felt it as if it were a light brushing across his skin. She spoke of small adventures she had imagined, little journeys through the backyard as if it were an endless multiverse. Morty listened, feeling the layers of her imagination touch his own. The backyard was no longer merely a patch of grass and trees. It was a vast landscape of possibility, where moments and memories intertwined, soft and infinite. Rick's voice returned, gentle and deliberate. "You'll learn, Morty, that most people chase big adventures, dangerous adventures, flashy ones. But the ones that matter, they're quiet. They're here, in the hum of a tree, in the heartbeat of a friend, in the way sunlight warms the skin." Morty felt each word resonate, folding into the rhythm of his own awareness. He had understood this instinctively for some time, but hearing it spoken aloud made the lesson deeper, heavier with meaning. The afternoon stretched lazily into evening, the sun lowering itself toward the horizon, spilling warmth that felt like a sigh across the world. Morty felt the subtle shift in the air, the change in vibration as day became night. He leaned against the tree, allowing its steady pulse to anchor him, its patient rhythm syncing with his own. He could feel the world exhaling softly, a gentle release that wrapped him in comfort and quiet understanding. Summer rested her head on his shoulder, speaking in soft tones of things that mattered little and everything all at once. They talked of clouds, of fleeting patterns in the sky, of whispers they had imagined in the corners of the yard. Morty could sense the contours of her words, the warmth behind them, even though he could not see the expressions on her face. And, in this quiet communion, he felt an intimacy that was both grounding and expansive, a bridge between souls without the need for sight. Rick's hum continued in the background, a steady, low vibration that seemed to weave together the threads of the day. Morty realized that he was learning to feel time differently, not as something linear or pressing, but as a gentle current to float upon. Past, present, and future blended into soft waves of awareness, each moment stretching into the next, without urgency, without demand. It was a lesson in patience, in presence, in quiet observation. As dusk deepened, Morty felt a sudden, strange clarity. The world was alive in ways invisible, humming with connections and pulses he could feel, but could not name. He understood that he had begun to see without sight, to travel without moving, to know without being told. And in this understanding, a soft, unspoken joy rose in him, not loud or demanding, but calm, persistent, and luminous. Night fell slowly, wrapping the backyard in a dark velvet that was not frightening, only soft and full of promise. Morty lay back against the grass, feeling the cool touch of the earth, the faint vibration of the universe beneath him, the lingering warmth of summer's presence beside him. Rick's voice faded into a gentle hum, like a lullaby for those willing to listen. Morty closed his eyes fully, not in surrender, but in trust, knowing that the world would continue to unfold around him, carrying him gently into sleep. In that quiet night, he felt the first threads of understanding about himself, about others, and about the universe that cradled them all. He did not yet know where this path would lead, or what adventures awaited in silence and subtlety, but he knew that he was ready to follow. He had discovered that presence, attention, and empathy were the truest forms of adventure, and as he drifted into slumber, the backyard, the tree, the multiverse, and the humming world wrapped around him like a soft, endless blanket. And somewhere, deep in the quiet of that night, Morty smiled, feeling the pulse of life, the warmth of love. and the infinite rhythm of things unseen but deeply felt. The morning arrived like a soft whisper, brushing gently against the house and filling the air with warmth that seemed to seep into every corner. Morty lay in his bed, the vibration of the wooden floor beneath him a quiet rhythm that matched the pulse of his own heartbeat. He did not open his eyes, for he had learned that the world could be felt more deeply than it could ever be seen. Each breath, each subtle shift of air, each faint hum of the universe around him was enough to draw him into its quiet mystery. Summer appeared in the doorway, a soft presence like sunlight filtered through leaves. Morty felt her energy before she spoke, a gentle ripple of warmth and anticipation brushing against him. "Morty," she whispered, "come see what I found." Morty tilted his head slightly, feeling the tug of curiosity deep in his chest. He rose slowly, step by careful step, allowing the world to guide him through sensation rather than sight. The grass beneath his bare feet was damp, cool, and vibrant with life, each blade pressing softly into his skin, a tiny reminder of the quiet persistence of the earth. They wandered toward the old garden behind the house, a place that had long been forgotten by most, but alive in Morty's perception. He felt the soft rustle of leaves as the wind passed through the trees, the faint vibration of insects moving unseen across the soil. Summer ran ahead, her laughter rolling in gentle waves that Morty sensed more than heard. He followed, letting the garden itself direct his movements, feeling the rhythm of life in every subtle motion around him. Rick appeared quietly, leaning against the edge of the garden, the faint scent of motor oil and herbs trailing behind him. Morty could feel the familiar energy radiating from Rick, a constant presence that grounded him even in the strange, shifting layers of the world. "Morty," Rick said softly, "sometimes the smallest things teach the biggest lessons. Look closer, feel deeper, and don't be afraid to discover what others overlook." Morty nodded inwardly, letting the words nestle in the quiet corners of his mind. The garden was a labyrinth of textures, scents, and soft vibrations. Morty ran his fingers along the rough bark of an ancient oak, feeling the grooves and ridges as if reading a language only he could understand. A gentle hum resonated beneath his touch, subtle and persistent, like the slow pulse of the universe itself. He felt the life of the tree, the slow, patient growth that had endured decades, the quiet wisdom that radiated outward without demand or assertion. Summer knelt beside him, tracing the veins of leaves with her fingers, the energy of her presence weaving with his own in a gentle, unspoken dialogue. Morty noticed the small creatures moving through the garden, ants carrying tiny crumbs, spiders, weaving intricate webs, worms shifting quietly beneath the soil. Each life form had a rhythm, a pulse, a subtle vibration that he could feel through his senses. He bent closer, sensing their tiny energies, realizing that every being carried a story, a small imprint on the vast, silent universe. And in this understanding, he felt a quiet awe, a sense of reverence for the unseen patterns that connected everything. Rick hummed softly, a vibration that seemed to sync with the pulse of the garden, the heartbeat of Morty, and the faint rhythm of the day. "Most people miss these things, Morty," Rick said gently. "They rush through life looking for noise, for excitement. But the truth, it's in the silence, in the small, subtle vibrations that tell you what matters most." Morty tilted his head, absorbing the words, letting the quiet understanding bloom inside him. The afternoon stretched lazily, the sunlight drifting slowly across the garden, painting the air with warmth and light that he could feel more than see. Morty explored the textures of the soil beneath his fingertips, the soft touch of moss on stones, the faint vibration of the roots beneath the earth. Each sensation carried a quiet lesson, teaching him patience, attentiveness, and the profound joy of noticing what most overlooked. Summer's laughter echoed in the background, a soft, rolling vibration that complemented the rhythm of his own heartbeat. Rick led them to a small clearing in the garden, where a crooked, half-forgotten fountain had long ceased to flow. Morty knelt beside it, feeling the cool stone beneath his hands, the faint trace of water that lingered in the air. Rick hummed, his hands brushing over the fountain, and Morty felt the subtle pulse of the stone, the quiet memory of movement, of water, of life that had passed but left an echo. "Everything remembers, Morty," Rick said, "even when it seems still, even when it seems forgotten." Morty understood immediately, feeling the vibration of memory, of presence, of small acts that never disappeared entirely. Summer leaned against him, her warmth a steady pulse alongside his own. "I think it's alive," she whispered. Morty smiled inwardly, sensing the truth in her words. The garden, the fountain, the tiny lives moving unseen. They were alive, and they responded to his presence, to his awareness. The universe was not distant or chaotic. It was patient, deliberate, and full of subtle communication if one only took the time to feel it. As the sun sank lower, shadows stretched across the garden, soft and gentle. Morty lay back against the grass, letting the textures of the earth press against him, the warmth of summer's presence beside him, and the quiet hum of Rick in the background. He closed his eyes fully, surrendering to the vibration of the world, the rhythm of life, the quiet pulse of existence. Each breath carried him deeper into understanding, deeper into a connection with the universe that required no sight, no words, only attention and trust. The evening brought a cooling breeze, carrying the faint scent of flowers and soil, of earth and life that pressed against his senses. Morty felt the soft vibration of insects settling into the night, the distant rustle of leaves, the gentle pulse of stars above that he could sense even without seeing them. The world was alive, quiet, persistent, and full of wonder. And in that, awareness. Morty felt a soft joy, a gentle peace that wrapped around him like a blanket of light and warmth. Summer whispered stories as they lay in the grass, tales of imagined adventures, fleeting glimpses of worlds beyond the garden. Morty felt each one as a soft brush of light across his consciousness, a ripple of energy that intertwined with his own sense of being. The garden became a landscape of possibility, a space where memory, imagination, and quiet discovery merged into something expansive, yet intimate, soft, yet infinite. Rick's hum persisted, steady and grounding, weaving together the threads of the day into a single, quiet pattern. Morty felt time differently here. Not linear, not urgent, but like a gentle river, each moment flowing into the next with patience and rhythm. He understood, in ways too subtle for words, that life's true adventures were often silent, contained in the small, unnoticed, and tender movements of the world. Night fell, stretching across the garden in a soft veil of darkness, carrying with it the gentle hum of life continuing unseen. Morty lay back fully, breathing in the rhythm of the earth, the warmth of those he loved, and the subtle vibration of the universe itself. He did not need to open his eyes. He did not need to see. He only needed to feel, to listen, and to exist within the gentle, infinite pulse of everything around him. And somewhere, deep in the quiet, He smiled, knowing that the garden, the world, and the unseen patterns of life were enough. That the universe, in its patience and persistence, had given him a place to exist, to notice, to feel. And in that awareness, Morty drifted slowly into sleep, cradled by warmth, light, and the soft, infinite hum of the world. The morning air was cool, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and distant flowers, a subtle perfume that seemed to linger in the corners of the house long after the dawn had passed. Morty lay in his bed, the wooden floor beneath vibrating softly, a slow heartbeat of the house itself that mirrored the quiet rhythm of his own chest. He did not open his eyes, for he had learned that the world could be understood through feeling, through attention, through the gentle currents of life that passed unnoticed by others. Summer appeared at the doorway, barefoot and laughing softly, a gentle vibration that Morty could feel more than hear. "Morty," she whispered, "come with me. There's something you need to feel." Morty tilted his head slightly, curiosity stirring in the quiet chamber of his chest. He rose slowly, each movement deliberate, letting the warmth of the sunlight on his skin guide him, the soft pulse of the floor beneath his feet directing each careful step. They walked together to the edge of the backyard, where a small patch of wildflowers had grown through the cracks of a forgotten stone path. The petals were soft and fragile, brushing gently against Morty's fingertips, carrying faint vibrations that spoke of life, persistence, and quiet resilience. Summer knelt beside him, her hands tracing the edges of the flowers, the energy of her presence a gentle hum that intertwined with his own. Morty felt a warmth spread through him, an unspoken connection that needed no sight, no words, only attention and presence. Rick arrived shortly after, moving with a soft rhythm, not loud or urgent, as he sometimes did. Morty could sense him before. He appeared, the faint pull of energy, a subtle vibration in the air that reminded him that he was not alone. Rick crouched beside Morty, letting his hands rest lightly on his shoulders, grounding him in ways that were quiet but profoundly reassuring. "Morty," Rick said softly, "today is about noticing, about understanding the life that exists, even when no one is looking." Morty tilted his head, absorbing the words, letting the soft wisdom settle into the folds of his mind. They wandered slowly through the wildflowers, each step a gentle press against the earth, each breath a quiet acknowledgement of the life surrounding them. Morty noticed the faint vibration of insects moving through the grass, the subtle pulse of the roots beneath the soil, the hum of a distant creek flowing lazily over stones. Each element carried a story, a presence, a gentle insistence that life was alive even when unseen. Morty felt the rhythm of the world synchronize with his own heartbeat, a slow, patient dance of awareness. Summer laughed quietly, her sound a rolling wave of warmth that Morty sensed in his chest. "I think they're alive," she whispered, referring to the flowers, the grass, the tiny creatures that moved invisibly around them. Morty smiled inwardly, feeling the truth of her words vibrate gently through him. Life was alive in the smallest details, in the tiniest movements, in the quiet persistence of existence. And in noticing these small wonders, Morty felt a joy that was soft, luminous, and enduring. Rick hummed a low, steady tune, a vibration that echoed faintly through the garden and into Morty's chest. Most people look for adventure in chaos, Morty. But the real adventure, he said softly, is here, in the unnoticed, in the quiet, in the way life moves around you when you're patient enough to feel it. Morty tilted his head, and pressed his palms against the soft soil, feeling the tiny vibrations of life ripple into his fingertips. He understood deeply that the universe spoke in subtle whispers, not shouts. The afternoon sun shifted, stretching long shadows across the garden. Morty and Summer explored a small, hidden nook beneath a twisted old oak, where the earth was soft, the air fragrant with moss, and the vibration of life constant and quiet. Morty leaned back, pressing his fingers into the grass, feeling the hum of roots, the faint pulse of insects, and the slow, steady heartbeat of the tree above him. It was a lesson in patience, in presence, and in the gentle understanding that life's beauty often exists in stillness rather than motion. Rick's hum continued, weaving through the garden like a quiet river of sound, a reminder that even the smallest vibrations carried meaning. Morty realized that he could sense patterns, rhythms, and flows that no one else noticed. He felt the connection between the flowers, the soil, the air, and the creatures moving invisibly among them. He understood that life was not just what was seen, but what was sensed, felt, remembered, and understood in quiet moments of awareness. Summer rested her head against Morty's shoulder, whispering of imagined journeys through the backyard, as if it were an endless, intricate universe. Morty felt the soft warmth of her energy merge with his own, creating a space of gentle communion, an unspoken understanding that required neither sight nor sound. The garden became more than a patch of earth. It was a landscape of discovery, intimacy, and wonder, where every vibration mattered and every presence was felt. As the sun began to sink, the air cooled, carrying the faint scent of evening dew and distant flowers. Morty lay back on the soft earth, feeling the garden press gently against him, the subtle hum of life vibrating through every sense. The warmth of summer beside him, the steady presence of Rick, and the quiet rhythm of the world created a cocoon of safety and calm. He did not open his eyes. He did not need to. The world was already vivid, alive, and intimately familiar through sensation and attention alone. Rick's hum softened further, merging with the quiet pulse of the garden, the faint vibration of insects, the subtle rhythm of roots and trees. Morty realized he was learning to understand time differently, not as a linear path of events, but as a gentle flow of presence and awareness, moments stretched, curved, and intertwined, each one carrying meaning that could be felt rather than observed. The universe whispered its lessons softly, and Morty listened with all of himself. Night arrived slowly, wrapping the garden in a soft velvet cloak of dark and gentle promise. Morty felt the vibrations of the unseen creatures settling into sleep, the slow hum of the stars above brushing faintly against his consciousness. The garden, the flowers, the trees, and the subtle life forms all seemed to breathe in unison, a lullaby in invisible chords. Morty lay back fully, surrendering to the rhythm, the warmth, and the quiet understanding that enveloped him. Summer whispered her last imagined story of the day, a tale of hidden gardens, secret paths, and small, unnoticed wonders. Morty felt the words as gentle ripples of vibration across his chest and into his heart. He understood that stories, like life, could be felt more than seen, known more than described, and that the softest lessons often carried the deepest meaning. Rick's presence lingered in the background, a grounding hum, a gentle pulse that reminded Morty of safety, love, and the quiet magic of attention. Morty pressed his hands into the soil one last time that evening, feeling the subtle vibrations ripple into him, connecting him to the world, to summer, to Rick and to the unseen patterns of life that surrounded them. He felt a deep, unspoken gratitude, a recognition that being present, noticing and feeling was the most profound adventure of all. As Morty drifted towards sleep, the garden, the universe, and the gentle hum of life wrapped around him like a soft, infinite blanket. He did not open his eyes, for he had discovered that presence and perception were more vivid, more alive than any sight could ever be. And somewhere deep inside he smiled, knowing that the quiet, the small, and the subtle held more wonder than he could have ever imagined. The morning arrived without announcement, a quiet unfolding of light that seeped gently through the curtains and brushed the room with warmth. Morty lay in his bed, the vibrations of the wooden floor beneath him a faint echo of the life surrounding the house. He did not open his eyes, for he had long learned that the world could be felt, understood, and remembered through presence alone. Breath by breath, pulse by pulse, the universe whispered its subtle secret, and he listened with care. Summer appeared in the doorway, her presence a gentle ripple of energy that brushed softly against him. "Morty," she said, her voice low and melodic, "come with me. There's something strange today." Morty tilted his head slightly, curiosity stirring within the quiet chamber of his chest. He rose slowly, allowing the warmth of the morning and the faint vibration of the floor to guide his steps. Each movement was deliberate, patient, attuned to the subtleties of the world around him. They wandered toward the backyard, where the garden had shifted in ways Morty could sense but not see. The air carried the faint scent of crushed grass and damp soil, mingled with the delicate perfume of wildflowers. Summer ran lightly ahead, her laughter a rolling vibration that echoed in Morty's chest rather than in his ears. He followed her, feeling the small, subtle rhythms of life, the pulse of the earth beneath his feet, the hum of unseen insects, the slow sway of branches overhead. Rick appeared quietly, leaning against the edge of the garden, his presence a familiar grounding force. Morty could sense the gentle ripple of his energy, the subtle pull of attention that reminded him he was not alone. "Morty," Rick said softly, "today is about noticing something more than usual. There are patterns beneath the patterns, vibrations beneath the vibrations, lessons hidden in the quiet." Morty tilted his head again, absorbing the words as they settled in the soft folds of his mind, a gentle seed of awareness taking root. They came to a small clearing beneath an ancient oak, where the sunlight sifted through the branches in soft, golden streaks. Morty pressed his hands to the rough bark, feeling the slow pulse of life flowing through the tree, the subtle vibration of years folded into its being. He could sense the tiny creatures moving beneath the soil, the delicate rhythm of roots shifting imperceptibly, the quiet hum of the air itself. And in that stillness, he realized that there was a new dimension to his perception. A small, strange ability to feel things more intensely, more vividly than he ever had before. Summer knelt beside him, tracing the edges of leaves with her fingers, her warmth a soft vibration that intertwined with his own. Morty felt a connection that was both familiar and strange, as if the energy of the garden and the presence of summer had merged with him in a quiet, invisible dance. He realized with a gentle thrill that he could sense the emotions of the plants, the creatures, even the shifting air. A faint resonance that spoke in ways words could never capture. Rick hummed a low, steady tone, a vibration that seemed to sync with the pulse of the clearing, the heartbeat of Morty, and the subtle rhythm of the day. "You're feeling it now, Morty," Rick said. "Not with your eyes, not with your hands, but with the rest of yourself. That's a gift, a quiet one, and it will guide you if you learn to listen. Morty tilted his head, pressing his palms more firmly against the tree, letting the vibration of life ripple into him, folding itself gently into his awareness. They moved through the garden slowly, each step deliberate, each breath attuned to the subtle movements of life around them. Morty noticed the faint hum of an ant carrying a crumb, the delicate pulse of a spider spinning its web, the almost imperceptible quiver of grass blades swaying in rhythm with the wind. Each tiny vibration carried meaning, a story, a lesson in attentiveness and care. And Morty felt that he was beginning to understand, not just the world, but himself, and the small, quiet power of truly sensing life. Summer's laughter echoed softly, a warmth that Morty could feel pressing against his chest, intertwining with the rhythm of his heartbeat. "I think it's magic," she whispered. Morty smiled inwardly, sensing the truth in her words. The garden, the creatures, the air, the roots beneath his hands, all seemed alive in ways that went beyond sight or sound. He could feel the subtle threads that connected everything, the soft pulse of life running beneath the ordinary, the unnoticed, the gentle. Rick's hum persisted, weaving together the elements of the garden, the quiet energy of summer, and the vibrations within Morty himself. "Most people chase big, loud, obvious adventures, Morty," Rick said. "But the ones that matter, the ones that change you, they're quiet. They're hidden in vibrations, patterns, and whispers. You're beginning to notice them. That's your gift." Morty pressed his hands deeper into the soil, feeling the pulse of life travel through him, and understood that this was not just observation, but participation, a gentle, intimate dialogue with the universe. As the afternoon stretched lazily toward evening, Morty discovered that his perception had grown even more subtle. He could sense the faint echo of footsteps in the distance, the soft vibration of wings brushing the air, the hum of insects nesting in hidden corners. Each presence carried its own rhythm, its own pattern, and Morty felt a quiet joy in noticing them all. The garden had become a living, breathing map of energy, and he was learning to read it without eyes, without words, only through presence and attention. Summer rested her head against his shoulder, whispering stories of imagined adventures in this secret, alive garden. Morty felt the warmth of her energy merge with his own, creating a cocoon of gentle awareness and shared understanding. The world outside the garden seemed distant, unimportant, as if time itself had folded into the soft, vibrating hum that surrounded him. He understood that the real adventures were here, in subtle perception, in connection, in quiet empathy, in the gentle discovery of life's invisible rhythms. Night began to settle, soft and patient, wrapping the garden in shadows that carried warmth rather than fear. Morty lay back against the soft earth, letting the vibrations of life settle into his chest, the gentle rhythm of the universe brushing softly against him, the warmth of summer beside him, the grounding presence of Rick nearby, and the infinite hum of the world created a sanctuary of calm. Morty did not open his eyes. He did not need to. The universe was alive, vivid, and intimately present through feeling and attention alone. Rick's hum softened, blending with the quiet pulse of the garden, the subtle vibration of insects, and the gentle rhythm of roots and trees. Morty felt the threads of connection, the unseen links between creatures, air, soil, and sky, and realized that the gift he had sensed earlier was becoming more real, more powerful. It was not a power of force or speed or sight. It was the quiet ability to perceive, to understand, to feel life in its most delicate, intricate forms. As Morty drifted towards sleep beneath the ancient oak, the garden, the creatures, and the faint energy of the universe wrapped around him like a soft, infinite blanket, he did not open his eyes. He did not need to. He only needed to exist, to feel, to listen, and to let the subtle, persistent pulse of life carry him into the gentle arms of slumber. And somewhere, deep in the quiet, he smiled, feeling the warmth, the hum, the subtle connection of everything around him. The universe was alive, gentle, and infinitely patient, and Morty had begun to understand that the quiet power of perception, of attention, and of empathy was the truest adventure of all. The key day began with the hush of rain, not loud or urgent, but soft and persistent, like a gentle hand tapping on the roof of the house. The drops fell in a rhythm that Morty could feel more than hear, a steady pulse that seemed to echo the quiet heartbeat of the world itself. He lay still beneath the covers, his eyes closed, the cool air brushing against his skin, and the soft hum of the floor beneath him carrying the vibrations of the morning. The rain was not just water falling, it was a language, a whispering of the sky to the earth, and Morty listened with reverence. Summer appeared beside him, her presence warmer than the morning light, a ripple of energy that cut through the cool dampness of the air. She nudged him gently. "Morty," she whispered, "come outside with me. The garden feels different when it rains." Her words vibrated softly, each one brushing against him like a petal. Morty rose slowly, feeling the slight shiver of the floor, the quiet pulse of the house welcoming the day. He followed her, each step guided by the rhythm of the falling rain. The garden was alive in new ways. The soil carried a deeper hum, saturated with water, resonating through his fingertips as he touched it. The leaves above swayed heavily, droplets, gathering at their edges before tumbling down, each drop a tiny heartbeat in the symphony of the storm. Morty tilted his face upward, letting the cool rain brush against his skin, each drop carrying a story from the sky. Summer laughed lightly beside him, her voice blending with the rhythm of the rain, and Morty felt warmth spread through him despite the chill of the morning. Rick joined them quietly, his coat damp and heavy, but his presence as steady as always. Morty sensed him instantly, the grounding vibration that never failed to remind him of safety. "Morty," Rick said softly, "rain is more than water. It's memory falling back to the earth. Every drop has traveled farther than we can imagine, and here it is, whispering against your skin." Morty absorbed the words, pressing them deep into the folds of his mind. He tilted his head, listening not just to the drops, but to the spaces. Between them, the quiet silences that carried meaning too. They wandered through the wet grass together, Morty's bare feet sinking softly into the soil. He pressed his toes into the earth and felt the rhythm of the rain resonating beneath him, carried through the ground, into the roots, into the creatures burrowing deep for shelter. It was as if the world itself was breathing slower, more deliberately, and Morty matched his own breath to its pace. He felt not separate from the rain, but part of its pattern, one small note in its infinite song. Summer tugged at his hand and guided him to the old fountain, where water now gathered in shallow pools across its cracked stone. Morty knelt beside it, touching the surface with his fingertips, feeling the vibrations ripple outward in circles. He could sense the echo of the water's memory, the countless drops before these, each one returning, each one part of a cycle larger than he could ever imagine. Summer dipped her fingers in too, laughing as the ripples mingled, her presence brushing against him like a gentle wave. Rick hummed quietly, his sound blending with the rain until it became indistinguishable from the natural rhythm. "You're beginning to sense the cycles, Morty," he said. "Not just the vibrations, not just the presence, but the patterns that bind it all together. Rain falls, rivers flow, roots drink, and clouds form again. It's all one motion, stretched out. In time." Morty pressed his hand deeper into the pool, letting the ripples carry his awareness outward, and he understood. The world was not fragments, but continuity. Every moment feeding the next, every drop returning, every life connected. As the rain softened into mist, Morty and Summer lay back on the damp grass, letting the cool drops kiss their skin. Morty felt the vibrations of the earth beneath him, heavier now with water, alive in new ways. He sensed worms stirring in the soil, leaves sagging with weight, the faint quiver of roots drinking deeply. Summer's warmth beside him created a balance, the comfort of companionship against the cool persistence of the rain. He smiled inwardly, his chest humming with quiet joy. The afternoon passed in a steady rhythm, the rain fading to a drizzle, then to silence, leaving behind a garden that smelled rich and alive. Morty pressed his hands into the damp earth, feeling the softness of moss, the roughness of stone, the faint tremble of insects venturing back into the open air. Each sensation was a story, a fragment of the larger song of life, and Morty was beginning to hear it more clearly, not as scattered notes, but as a whole, flowing composition. Summer whispered stories of clouds traveling across distant skies, carrying secrets of oceans and mountains, releasing them here in their small garden. Morty felt her words as vibrations, soft ripples that merged with the hum of the damp earth. He realized that her stories, like Rick's wisdom, were part of the cycle too, passing into him, becoming part of his understanding, his quiet growth. Every word, every presence, every vibration was connected, each one feeding the next in endless continuity. Rick's hum grew quieter as the day leaned toward evening, a low, grounding vibration that reminded Morty of roots, of stone, of the earth itself. Morty sat still, listening to the faint sounds of the garden. A bird shaking droplets from its wings, the distant gurgle of water sliding down the roof, the soft shifting of leaves as they released the last of the rain. He realized that silence was not emptiness but fullness, a space where every subtle sound, every faint vibration could be noticed more deeply. Night descended gently, wrapping the garden in shadows that felt calm and forgiving. Morty lay back once more, pressing his palms into the damp soil, feeling the quiet hum of the earth beneath him. He sensed the stars above, faint vibrations brushing against his awareness, distant but insistent, like soft notes in the same eternal song. Summer curled beside him, her warmth a steady presence, and Rick's energy lingered nearby, anchoring the moment in safety. Morty did not open his eyes. He did not need to. The rain, the soil, the garden, the presence of those he loved, all of it was vivid in the language of vibration, presence, and connection. He understood now that his gift was not just to notice, but to participate, to become part of the cycles, the patterns, the quiet music of the world. It was not a power of control, but of belonging, of resonance, of empathy with all that lived and moved quietly around him. As sleep approached, soft and inevitable, Morty smiled inwardly. He felt the memory of rain still clinging to the air, the hum of the earth saturated with life, the warmth of summer beside him, and the quiet vibration of Rick nearby. The world was alive, patient, and endlessly connected, and Morty felt at home within it. He did not open his eyes, for he had no need. He only breathed, listened, and let the song of life carry him gently into the night. And somewhere, in the quiet rhythm of rain returning to the earth, he drifted softly into dreams, part of the same cycle, part of the same song, part of everything. The morning opened with a silence that was not empty but full, as though the world had chosen to pause and breathe deeply. Morty lay in bed, his eyes closed, listening to the quiet hum that surrounded him. The house carried its usual vibrations, the creak of wood expanding with warmth, the faint stir of air moving through unseen corners, the slow heartbeat of the world pressing gently against his skin. It was a silence that spoke, a silence alive with hidden currents, and Morty listened with care. Summer entered softly, her presence warm and immediate, a gentle ripple against his awareness. She knelt beside him and touched his shoulder lightly, her energy brushing across him like sunlight through sheer fabric. "Morty," she whispered, "come outside. The world feels strange today." Morty tilted his head, curiosity stirring gently inside him, and rose, slowly, guided by sensation, more than sight. Each step across the floor was steady, deliberate, each breath a soft acknowledgement of the morning's hush. Outside, the garden was still damp from yesterday's rain, carrying the scent of soil and moss, a fragrance that wrapped around Morty like a blanket. The air itself seemed quieter than usual, as though waiting. Morty pressed his bare feet into the grass, feeling the cool earth beneath him, and sensed the faint hum of roots drinking from the rain's memory. Summer's hand slipped into his, warm and reassuring, anchoring him as they walked slowly across the yard. Rick was there already, leaning against the crooked old fountain. Morty felt his presence instantly, the steady vibration that always reminded him of roots or stone, strong and grounding. Rick's hum was softer than usual, almost cautious, blending with the stillness of the morning. "Morty," Rick said quietly, "today isn't about the garden, it's about people. Listen closely, not to the world outside, but to the ones beside you." Morty tilted his head, the words folding into him like seeds waiting to bloom. They sat together near the fountain, the stone damp and cool beneath Morty's hands. He turned his attention inward, toward Summer's presence beside him. At first, he felt only warmth, the steady hum of her heartbeat, the gentle rhythm of her breathing. But as he listened more deeply, as he opened himself fully, he began to sense something else. A subtle trembling, a vibration that was not physical, but emotional, a softness beneath her laughter. Summer had always felt like sunlight to him, warm and constant, but now he realized that even sunlight flickers, shifting quietly with unseen winds. Summer spoke of dreams she'd had the night before, little fragments of imagined worlds and strange adventures. Morty listened carefully, not only to the words, but to the quiet tones beneath them, the faint hesitations, the subtle warmth that deepened when she spoke of joy, the softer quiver when she spoke of fear. He realized he could feel her emotions woven through the vibrations of her voice, the way her presence moved, the rhythm of her pauses. It was not just what she said, but what she carried within her, and Morty could sense it as clearly as he felt the hum of the earth. Rick watched quietly, his presence steady, his hum a grounding force in the background. "You're beginning to notice it, Morty," he said softly. "Every person carries a song, a vibration of who they are, what they feel. Most people don't listen closely enough to hear it, but you can. You're beginning to. Morty pressed his palm lightly against the stone fountain, anchoring himself, and nodded inwardly. He could feel Summer's joy, her quiet unease, her boundless imagination, all vibrating like threads woven into a larger pattern. The day stretched on slowly, the silence of the morning giving way to gentle sounds. Birds stirring in the branches, water dripping from leaves, the faint rustle of wind brushing the edges of the garden. Morty and Summer moved together through the space, but now Morty paid closer attention not to the world itself, but to the small shifts in her presence. When she laughed, he felt her warmth expand outward like ripples. When she grew quiet, he sensed a softer vibration, a gentle pull inward. Every moment carried more than words, and Morty felt himself learning to listen with his whole being. Rick guided them to sit beneath the ancient oak, the same tree that had watched over so many of their days. Morty pressed his hands against the grass, feeling the slow heartbeat of roots beneath, and turned his awareness again toward Summer. She leaned against him, her head resting lightly on his shoulder, and in that touch he felt her unspoken comfort, the quiet gratitude she carried for simply being near him. Morty breathed slowly, letting her energy mingle with his own, and understood that connection was not built only through words or sight, but through presence, through vibration, through the unspoken rhythm between souls. As the afternoon unfolded, Morty realized he could sense Rick as well, though in different ways. Rick's energy was heavier, more grounded, like the steady pulse of stone or iron. It did not flicker like Summer's warmth, but carried weight, strength, and endurance. Yet beneath that steadiness, Morty noticed faint tremors too, a subtle weariness, a quiet longing, vibrations that spoke of burdens carried silently. Morty did not fully understand them, but he could feel them, and that was enough. Rick said little, allowing Morty to explore this new awareness on his own. The silence was not empty but generous, giving Morty space to notice, to feel, to understand. He leaned back against the oak, Summer still beside him, and let the subtle vibrations wash over him. Each breath carried with it the presence of those he loved, each moment filled with the soft music of emotions that needed no explanation. Morty realized that this was another kind of perception, another gift, the ability to feel not just the world, but the hearts of those within it. The sun dipped slowly, shadows stretching long across the garden. Morty lay back on the damp grass, pressing his palms to the earth, sensing the hum of roots, the whisper of insects, the slow rhythm of the day fading into evening. Summer curled closer, her warmth steady, and Rick's presence lingered nearby, grounding them both. Morty did not open his eyes. He had no need. The world was alive within him, not only through the vibrations of nature, but through the songs of those he loved. Night came softly, carrying with it the faint perfume of flowers opening in the dark. Morty felt the vibrations of the stars above, distant but persistent, like faint notes in a faraway song. He breathed slowly, letting the rhythm of Summer's heartbeat and the grounding hum of Rick guide him deeper into calm. He realized that every person, every being, carried a song within them, a quiet music that could be heard if one listened with patience, empathy, and presence. As Morty drifted towards sleep, he smiled inwardly. He had discovered something new, something tender and profound, that the world was not just alive through soil and trees and rain, but through hearts, through emotions, through the subtle vibrations of love and longing. He did not need to open his eyes. He only needed to listen, to feel, to exist within the quiet music of everything. And in that stillness, Morty allowed himself to surrender, the hum of the garden, the warmth of summer, the grounding presence of Rick, and the quiet songs of their hearts carrying him gently into dreams. The next morning unfolded with a mist that blurred the edges of the world, softening every outline until the garden seemed more like a memory than a place. Morty stirred slowly, keeping his eyes closed, his awareness already reaching outward to touch the textures of the air. The fog carried its own rhythm, a muffled hush, like a great blanket laid gently across the earth. He breathed it in, feeling its cool weight press against his skin, and sensed how the world beneath it pulsed more quietly than usual, as though it was sleeping too. Rick's voice broke the silence gently, not as a demand, but as a suggestion carried on the mist. "Morty," he said, his tone uncharacteristically low, "it's time you take your listening beyond this place. The garden has taught you patience, but the world beyond it will teach you something else." Morty nodded faintly, though he did not move immediately. He felt Summer beside him, still wrapped in her dreams, her heartbeat steady and untroubled. Leaving the safety of the garden unsettled him, but curiosity softened the unease. When he rose at last, the mist greeted him like a second skin, cool and damp. Summer joined them soon after, rubbing sleep from her eyes, and together they followed Rick down the uneven path that led away from their home. Morty pressed his bare feet against the ground, letting each step ground him in the unseen currents beneath the soil. He was listening carefully, not only to the world, but to the quiet shifts in Summer's presence and the steady pull of Rick's. Every step carried more than movement. It carried awareness. The town was still wrapped in silence when they reached it, the streets muffled by fog. Morty felt the faint hum of many lives hidden behind walls and windows, each presence distinct, each vibration different. It was overwhelming at first, like standing before an ocean and trying to hear every drop of water. He pressed his palms together, steadying his breath, and remembered Rick's words. Patience, not urgency. One sound at a time, one presence at a time. Summer tugged his sleeve, guiding him toward the small square at the town center. There, beneath the fog, people were beginning to gather. Not many, only a handful, but enough for Morty to sense the tangled weave of their emotions. A woman carrying baskets of bread radiated a quiet steadiness, though beneath it he felt fatigue, like a low note trembling at the edge of her presence. A child nearby vibrated with a restless energy, sharp and quick like sparks leaping in every direction. An old man sitting alone carried a heavier song, slow and worn, with long pauses between the notes, as though his heart moved at half the pace of the world around him. Morty listened to them all, his attention drifting gently from one to another, not prying but simply noticing, as though acknowledging their hidden music was a kind of kindness. He realized that this too was connection, not in words or gestures, but in silent recognition, in letting people exist fully within his awareness without trying to change them. Summer watched him closely, her presence glowing with quiet pride. Rick said nothing, but Morty could sense the approval humming beneath his steady exterior. As the morning stretched into day, Morty followed Rick through winding streets. Everywhere he turned, there were vibrations to notice, the hurried pulse of a merchant arranging his stall, the quiet sorrow of a woman sweeping her doorstep, the steady hum of a dog dozing in a patch of mist-damp stone. Each one was distinct, a piece of music woven into the larger fabric of the town. Morty realized he had never truly felt how alive a place could be until now, how every being carried a note that contributed to the whole. But it was not always gentle. As they passed a narrow alley, Morty felt a vibration that unsettled him, sharp and discordant. He slowed, turning his awareness toward it, and found a young man leaning against the wall, his presence trembling with restlessness and hunger. Morty could sense the sharpness of his need, the impatience threaded through his being, the longing that clawed beneath his skin. It was uncomfortable to feel, yet Morty did not turn away. He stood still, breathing slowly, allowing the young man's song to exist within him without judgment. In that quiet acknowledgement, Morty sensed the sharpness ease, if only slightly, as though the burden had been seen, if not lifted. Rick placed a hand lightly on Morty's shoulder. "That's the hard part," he murmured. "Listening to what isn't easy. It's simple to hear joy, but harder to hear pain. You must learn to hold both without letting either undo you." Morty nodded, the weight of the lesson settling into him like stone pressing gently into soil. He could feel it was true. Connection was not only about warmth, but about presence, about being willing to notice even the songs that hurt. They left the alley and continued on, the day moving slowly as the fog thinned and light softened across the town. Morty felt less overwhelmed now, more anchored in the steady rhythm of his own breath. He allowed the vibrations of the town to flow through him, not clinging to any, simply noticing, letting them rise and fall like waves against the shore. It felt almost like dreaming while awake, a drifting awareness that carried him gently forward. By afternoon, they returned to the garden, the familiar hum of roots and soil welcoming him home. Morty pressed his palms into the earth, grounding himself, and let the weight of the town's many songs settle within him. He felt both full and quiet, as though he carried something vast inside, but also knew he did not need to hold it tightly. Summer leaned against him, her warmth soft and steady, and Rick lit a cigarette that glowed faintly in the dim light, his presence as grounded as ever. Morty thought of the woman with her baskets, the child with restless sparks, the man in the alley whose song trembled with hunger. Their vibrations lingered in him, woven into the larger music of his awareness. He realized that the world was not a single melody but a chorus, full of harmony and discord, joy and sorrow, each voice essential, each presence part of the whole. Listening to it all was not a burden, but a gift, a way of honoring existence itself. As evening deepened, Morty lay back beneath the oak tree, his hands resting lightly on the grass. Summer's laughter drifted beside him, quiet and unforced, and Rick's hum lingered like stone beneath soil. Morty breathed slowly, the memory of the town's many songs blending with the familiar rhythms of home. He realized that the world would never stop singing, never stop vibrating with hidden music. All he needed to do was listen, not to control, not to change, but to be present, to notice, to honor. The stars returned, faint and patient, their distant hum like the oldest song of all. Morty let their vibrations wash through him, soft and steady, until his breath aligned with their rhythm. The chorus of the world, the town, the garden, the family beside him, the distant stars, filled him with quiet awe. And in that stillness, Morty allowed himself to drift gently towards sleep, carried by the endless music of existence. The days that followed carried a rhythm as soft as the tides, each one folding into the next with gentle insistence. Morty felt himself moving differently now, not just within the garden, but within the world itself. He had begun to listen in ways he never thought possible, and the echoes of the town still lingered within him like distant music carried on the wind. Every presence, every vibration remained, not as noise but as threads woven into the quiet fabric of his being. Rick noticed it before anyone else. One afternoon, as Morty sat cross-legged in the damp grass, eyes still closed, Rick placed a flask beside him and muttered, "You're quieter, kid. Not the kind of quiet that comes from being lost, but the kind that comes from paying attention." Morty didn't answer, but his lips curved faintly, and Rick let the silence hang between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. Summer joined them, dropping down into the grass with a soft thud, her warmth pressing against Morty's side. She began talking about something she had seen in town, her voice rising and falling like the flicker of flame. Morty listened carefully, but not just to her words. He listened to the steady hum of her emotions, the pauses that carried more than sound, the way her energy expanded when she laughed and drew inward when she grew uncertain. He realized he could sense not only her moods, but her unspoken longings, the dreams she didn't know how to shape into sentences. Later that evening, Rick guided Morty back into town. "You can't just listen and carry it all inside," he explained. "You'll sink under the weight if you try. You've got to learn to respond not with talk or explanation, but with something simpler. Sometimes just being there, fully, is enough. You'll see." The town was busier now than Morty had ever known it, the marketplace humming with footsteps, conversations and laughter. At first, the sheer weight of vibrations pressed heavily against him, a rush of overlapping songs that made his chest tighten. But he breathed slowly, grounding himself in the steady rhythm of his own heartbeat, and let the chorus settle into something he could hold. The sounds became less overwhelming, less tangled, like a river that found its course. Rick led him to a small square where an old woman sat alone on a bench. Her presence trembled with loneliness, a slow, thin vibration that barely stirred the air. Morty felt it immediately, the hollow in her song, the way it seemed to fold in on itself as though afraid of being heard. He sat quietly beside her, not speaking, simply letting his awareness rest in hers. At first, she seemed startled, her vibration flickering with uncertainty. But as the minutes passed, Morty sensed the loneliness soften, just slightly, as though she felt less invisible. Rick didn't say anything, but Morty felt his teacher's steady approval in the background, a grounding hum that gave him strength. He realized then what Rick had meant. Responding wasn't always about action or words. Sometimes the answer was presence itself, a quiet acknowledgement that let another being's song know it was not alone. As the day continued, Morty found more moments to practice this new way of being. He stood near a merchant whose vibration carried exhaustion, and he lingered just long enough for the man's rhythm to steady even slightly. He crouched to listen to a child whose song bounced in scattered sparks, matching the boy's energy, not with control but with patience, waiting until the sparks dimmed into softer light. Each moment taught him that to respond was not to solve, but to share space, to let another's vibration feel held, recognized, accompanied. Summer wandered the town beside him, laughing at the way Morty seemed to stop for nearly everyone, as though the world itself demanded his attention. But beneath her teasing, Morty sensed something gentler. Admiration, pride, and a longing to be part of what he was learning. She did not feel the vibrations as he did, but she understood his effort, and her warmth deepened each time she watched him lean into another person's quiet need. As dusk fell, Rick gathered them beneath a lantern that flickered in the cooling air. "Morty," he said softly, You've got to remember that you can't hold everyone. You'll burn yourself out if you try. The point isn't to absorb their weight, but to share your steadiness. Be a bridge, not a vessel. Feel with them, but let the current pass through you. That's how you'll last. Morty nodded, though the lesson sat heavy inside him. He could sense the truth in Rick's words, the danger of drowning beneath too many songs. But he also felt the tenderness of what he was learning, and he wasn't ready to let it go. That night, back in the garden, Morty lay in the grass with Summer beside him, the oak tree standing as their shelter. He thought of the old woman on the bench, the merchant, the child, each of their vibrations now part of his memory. Summer reached for his hand and held it, her warmth steady and sure. "You're different now," she whispered. "But it's not a bad different. It feels good, like you're carrying more than just yourself." Morty didn't speak, but he smiled, the quiet truth of her words sinking into him like rain, into soil. The stars shimmered faintly above, their hum distant but eternal. Morty let their rhythm join with his own breath, and in that stillness he understood something new. Responding to the world didn't mean fixing it, didn't mean solving its endless tangle of sorrow and longing. It meant listening deeply, offering presence, letting another being's song feel less alone. And in that act, no matter how small, something shifted. Not everything, but enough. The night deepened, carrying with it the perfume of blossoms opening in the dark. Morty felt the garden's hum, Summer's warmth, Rick's steady grounding, and the distant songs of the town, all blending into a quiet chorus that wrapped around him like a blanket. He realized he did not need to see to know he belonged here, woven into the music of it all. His eyes remained closed, but his heart was wide open, listening, responding, being. And with that thought, Morty drifted slowly into dreams, carried by the songs of others and the steady rhythm of his own breath, a bridge between silence and sound, presence and love. The morning returned with a quiet so complete that even the birds hesitated to break it. The world seemed to wait, holding its breath in the pale light. Morty rose slowly, not because he felt hurried, but because he wanted to move in rhythm with that hush. He pressed his bare feet into the damp grass and sensed the ground's hum carrying upward into his body, steady and patient. The garden was awake, yet it whispered instead of sang, as if teaching him that presence could be a silence that still spoke. Summer joined him soon after, her warmth brushing against him like sunlight piercing through morning mist. She spoke little, but Morty didn't need words. He could feel the way her energy expanded, open and curious, as if she too was listening for something hidden just beneath the surface of the world. Rick lingered in the background, his hum steady as stone, a reminder that guidance was never far away. Rick's voice eventually broke the stillness. "Morty," he said, "you've learned to listen to people and to answer them with your presence. But there's more. Places themselves carry vibrations just like people do. A street, a room, even a lonely corner of the world. Pay attention to how a place feels, and then notice how your being changes it, even if you do nothing at all." Morty tilted his head, unsure at first what Rick meant. A place was just space, wasn't it? Soil, walls, air, nothing more. Yet he trusted Rick's words and followed him, Summer walking close behind. Together they left the garden and wandered toward the edge of town, where morning fog still lingered in alleys and corners. The first place they entered was a narrow lane where houses leaned close together and shadows clung like secrets. Morty felt the vibration immediately. It was heavy, not sharp like pain, but slow, sluggish, as if time itself struggled to move forward here. He stood quietly, pressing his palm against the rough brick wall. Beneath his skin, he sensed the echoes of years lived within those walls. Laughter, once bright, but now faded. Arguments that had left their mark. Long hours of waiting. The lane carried the residue of all of it, layered into its being. Morty let himself breathe with that heaviness, not resisting it, simply being part of it. Slowly, he felt the place shift, only slightly, as though recognizing his awareness. Summer reached for his hand, and he realized that her warmth joined with his, changing the vibration too. What had been stagnant now felt touched by presence, lightened not by force but by acknowledgement. Rick, watching from the edge of the lane, nodded faintly. They moved next to the town square. Here the vibrations were more complex, overlapping currents of people moving, talking, working. Morty felt the steady hum of trade, the sharp bursts of children's laughter, the quiet threads of worry carried by those passing through. It was not heavy like the lane, but busy, tangled, almost restless. Morty stepped into the middle of the square and stood still. He let the sounds and emotions wash through him, not clinging to any, but not pushing any away. Within a few moments, he noticed something subtle. The restlessness of the square softened, not because it grew quieter, but because his stillness created a rhythm others unconsciously leaned toward. People glanced at him, then went about their day, but Morty could feel the shift, a small change in the current. His presence had become part of the square's vibration, an anchor amid its restlessness. Summer smiled at him, sensing what had happened, even if she could not name it.
"It feels different when you're here," she whispered.
Morty blushed slightly, though his eyes remained closed, and Rick muttered something about resonance under his breath. Morty didn't need to understand the word fully. He understood the feeling. By afternoon, Rick guided them to the edge of the woods beyond town. The air there was cooler, filled with the layered songs of trees, roots, and unseen creatures. Morty touched the bark of a tree and listened. The forest's vibration was deep and slow, like a heartbeat stretched across centuries. He let his breath fall into its rhythm, and soon he felt himself blending into that ancient song. The woods did not shift as quickly as the square or the lane, but Morty sensed his presence being absorbed, acknowledged, welcomed. The forest accepted him as part of its chorus, neither more nor less important than a leaf or a root. The lesson deepened as dusk approached. Rick led Morty and Summer back toward the river that wound past the garden. The river's vibration was unlike any Morty had felt before. Fluid, restless, yet constant, carrying both the weight of stone and the lightness of air. Morty crouched by the water, trailing his fingers across the surface. He felt the rush of movement, the ceaselessness, the way the river never clung to any one moment. And then, softly, he felt how his stillness met its endless motion, creating balance rather than opposition. Summer sat beside him, dipping her toes into the water, her laughter soft and glowing. Morty felt her warmth blend with the river's restlessness, and he realized that presence could transform not only people, but the very rhythm of a place. To be still was not to do nothing. It was to shape the air, the soil, the water, simply by existing fully. Night fell as they lingered by the river, stars flickering into being above them. Rick lit a faint lantern, though its glow seemed unnecessary in the starlight. "Morty," he said at last, This is the truth. You don't need to speak or act loudly to change the world. Sometimes the quietest presence alters more than the
loudest gesture. Places remember. People remember. The air itself remembers. Your task isn't to force change. It's to be steady enough that others, even places themselves, find a new rhythm in your presence. Morty breathed deeply, letting
Rick's words sink into him. He thought of the lane that had softened, the square that had steadied, the forest that had welcomed him, the river that had balanced against his stillness. All of them different, yet each touched by the same truth. Presence mattered, not seeing, not speaking, not even doing in the usual sense, simply being. Summer leaned against his shoulder, her hum bright and tender. "You don't even know how much calmer it feels when you're around," she whispered. Morty smiled faintly, his eyes still closed, and let the night enfold him. The stars above vibrated like faint bells, the river hummed with endless movement, and the garden behind them pulsed with memory. Morty felt himself part of it all, no separation between his presence and the world's. As sleep began to brush softly against him, he understood that presence was not passive. It was active in its gentleness, transformative in its stillness. It was the quietest kind of strength, one that left no scars but shaped everything it touched. And with that realization, Morty allowed himself to drift, his body sinking into the earth's hum, his spirit carried on the stars' faint music. The night stretched long and quiet, the stars above holding their shimmer as if unwilling to close their eyes. Morty slept by the river, his breath steady, his presence still woven into the rhythm of flowing water. When morning came, the sun rose gently, laying a soft warmth across his face. He stirred slowly, half in dream, half awake, feeling as though the river had whispered to him all night, teaching without words. Summer was still beside him, curled like a flame at rest, while Rick stood a little farther away, watching the light spread across the horizon. "Morty," Rick said softly when the boy finally sat up. "You've listened to people, and you've listened to places. Now it's time to listen to memory." Morty rubbed his eyes and frowned. "Memory? But that's inside people, isn't it?" Rick shook his head. "Not only. Memory lives everywhere, in stones, in rivers, in walls, in the air we breathe. What has happened never disappears. It vibrates,
echoing through time. If you listen carefully, you can hear not only what is here now, but what has been before."
Morty blinked, both curious and uncertain. The idea felt too big for him to hold, but he trusted Rick's words. He always did. So he nodded, letting the thought rest inside him like a seed waiting for rain. They began walking back toward the garden, yet Rick did not stop there. Instead, he guided them to an old building on the edge of town. Its walls leaned inward, its wood darkened with age, its windows clouded like tired eyes. The moment Morty stepped inside, he felt something stir beneath his skin. The air was thick, carrying a vibration that was neither alive nor dead, but suspended, like voices waiting to be heard. Morty closed his eyes. At first, he felt only stillness, but then he let himself sink deeper, not forcing anything, just listening. Slowly, faint, impressions brushed against him, laughter echoing from long ago, the sound of chairs being moved, a quiet sob tucked into one corner. He could feel the memory of those who had once filled the room, their presence etched into the air. His breath trembled, not with fear, but with the weight of their lingering lives. Summer reached for his hand, grounding him. She felt the hum, too, though not as deeply as Morty. Together they stood in silence until Morty whispered, "It's like the room remembers." Rick's voice was low. "Exactly. Memories are not only inside us, they're part of the world itself. Every word, every
touch, every silence leaves an imprint. We walk inside oceans of memory every day, even if we don't notice."
They left the old building and made their way to the lane they had visited before. Morty paused there, closing his eyes once again. He no longer felt only the heaviness of stagnation. Now, beneath it, he sensed something deeper. He felt the echo of children once playing there, their voices clear and bright. He felt arguments that had left scratches in the air, voices raised, then silenced. He even felt one soft vibration, so faint it was almost gone, of someone whispering a prayer to themselves, asking the lane for protection. The memories layered together, not lost, but folded into the present. Morty let them move through him without clinging. Some were heavy, some were light, but all of them belonged. And in letting them exist, he felt the lane shift once more, not only softened, but now acknowledged. It was as if the lane had wanted someone to remember with it. By midday, Rick brought them back to the square. The square vibrated as it always had with movement and voices, but Morty knew now to listen, beyond the present. He stilled himself in the center, letting the hum of memory rise. He felt countless moments woven into the space, market stalls bustling, children chasing one another, a musician once standing at the corner playing a tune that had long faded, a silence that came from a day of mourning. The square was more than just what it was now. It was all that it had ever been. Morty opened his eyes, filled with wonder. It's like time doesn't leave, it just hides. Rick's gaze softened, and when you remember with it, you bring healing. Because memory aches when it's forgotten. You don't need to change the past, you only need to let it be heard. As afternoon fell, they wandered back to the woods. The forest, already deep with vibration, pulsed even more strongly when Morty listened for memory. He felt storms that had torn branches away, fires that had once licked the edges, footsteps of countless travelers, some joyful, some weary. He even felt the slow, endless memory of the trees themselves, growing ring by ring, holding within their trunks the story
of every season.
The forest did not merely exist in the present, it carried ages within it, a vast, living memory. Morty knelt at the base of a tree, pressing his palm to its bark. He let his breath merge with its steady rhythm. He didn't see images or hear words, only felt impressions, patience, endurance, cycles repeating. The memory of the forest was not sharp like human recollection. It was vast and slow, like the steady pulse of eternity. When evening came, Rick led them once more to the river. Morty sat at its edge, already knowing its surface carried endless motion. But when he listened for memory, he felt more. Rainstorms that had fed it, stones it had carried away, people who had walked along its banks whispering secrets into its current. The river remembered all of it, carrying every story forward, mixing them into its endless journey. Morty's chest swelled, not with sorrow, but with awe. He dipped his hands into the water, and for a moment he felt as though he held centuries within his palms. Summer leaned close, her voice gentle. It's like everything is alive. Even what's gone is still here. Morty nodded, unable to speak. He felt tears rise, but not from sadness, from the depth of the truth flowing through him. Presence was not only about the now, it was about standing within the whole tapestry, every thread of past and present woven together. Night deepened, the stars bright above. Rick finally spoke again, his voice low and steady. "Morty, memory isn't meant to weigh you down. It's meant to remind you that nothing is lost. Every laugh, every tear, every silence, they live on. The world carries them, and so do you. To listen is to honor them. And when you honor them, you bring peace to yourself and to the places around you." Morty breathed in the cool air, letting Rick's words settle like stones finding their place in a riverbed. He thought of the old building, the lane, the square, the woods, the river. He thought of the countless lives, the countless moments, all echoing quietly within the world. And he thought of how his presence, his listening, could ease that echo, could turn memory from ache into song. Summer rested her head against his shoulder, humming softly. Her voice seemed to blend with the stars themselves, a lullaby that carried no beginning or end. Morty closed his eyes, letting the vibration of memory hold him like an endless cradle. He felt not alone, never alone, but part of a story that stretched behind him and before him, unbroken and eternal. And as sleep finally began to fold around him, Morty understood. To listen to memory was not to live in the past. It was to become whole in the present, carrying with him all that had ever been, gently, lovingly, like a song that never fades. The night stretched long as Morty lay on the riverbank, his breath matching the rhythm of the flowing water. Summer's quiet humming had faded into silence, and Rick had fallen into his strange half-sleep, never entirely at rest, yet never completely awake. The stars scattered overhead like faint lanterns, and Morty felt their glow seep into him. He thought about memory and presence, about how the world held both, and wondered what came next. As he drifted towards sleep, the edges of reality softened, and he found himself entering a place where sound felt like color, and colors felt like touch. Dreams folded over him with the weight of a blanket woven by unseen hands. In this dream, Morty was not standing in the woods or beside the river. He was floating through a sky without sun or moon, only pale threads of light stretched across an endless horizon. The air hummed gently, not with memory, but with something softer, more fluid. Each sound felt like a possibility, each flicker of light like a path that could open or close. Morty reached out his hands, and though he couldn't see his body clearly, he could feel vibration streaming through him. A figure appeared, shimmering faintly. It wasn't Rick, though the outline reminded him of his grandfather. It wasn't Summer either, though the warmth of its presence carried her quiet steadiness. The figure had no face, only a gentle glow, and when it spoke, its voice carried 100 tones at once, like every person Morty had ever known whispering together. "Morty," the figure said softly, "you've learned to listen to the world. You've felt memory and presence, but now you must learn to listen to dreams. They are not only yours, they belong to the whole." Morty's voice trembled as he asked, "What do you mean?" The figure extended a hand. Morty took it, and suddenly the horizon rippled. Beneath him, scenes flickered, a child running in a meadow, an old woman resting beside a lamp, a man sitting alone at a table, humming to himself. Morty realized these were not his own dreams. They were fragments of others, dreams woven together into one vast fabric. Every dream, the figure explained, is a thread. Some are personal, some are shared. They move between people, between worlds, carrying wishes, fears, and quiet truths. When you sleep, you do not leave the world. You enter another layer of it. And just as presence and memory shape life, Dreams shape what could be. Morty felt his chest tighten with awe. He bent closer to the flickering images, sensing their fragility. Some dreams were joyful, shimmering brightly. Others were heavy, weighed down with shadows. Yet all of them glowed with the same gentle pulse, alive with possibility. When he opened his mouth to speak, the dream shifted again. Now he was standing on a shoreline where the waves carried whispers. Each wave left behind fragments of stories that dissolved into sand. Morty knelt, listening carefully, and realized he was hearing the unspoken hopes of strangers. He could feel their longing for peace, their ache for connection, their gratitude for small kindnesses. It was overwhelming, yet strangely calming. The figure's voice rose again. To listen to dreams is to honor what has not yet happened, but could. It is to stand inside the river of possibility, gently, without forcing. You do not control dreams, Morty. You let them move through you. And when you carry them, you help others carry theirs too. Morty thought of summer. He thought of Rick. He thought of his family and the countless faces he had glimpsed in fleeting encounters. All of them carried dreams, whether they spoke them aloud or not. And here, in this dream space, those quiet wishes glowed like stars, fragile but enduring. When Morty opened his eyes again, dawn was breaking. He lay still by the river, breathing deeply, holding the dream inside him. Summer stirred beside him, yawning softly. Rick was already awake, watching the water as though he'd been expecting Morty to rise with the light. Morty whispered,
Rick, I think I heard dreams last night. Not just mine, everyone's, like they were all together. Rick gave a small nod, his gaze steady. Good. You're learning.
Dreams are as real as memory and presence, Morty. They may not exist in front of your eyes, but they exist all the same. The world is shaped not just by what has happened or what is happening, but by what is imagined, wished, and feared. You listen to those, and you'll understand more than most ever will. Summer leaned close, brushing her hair from her face. What did they feel like? Morty paused, trying to put the sensation into words. They felt delicate, like if I held them too tightly they'd vanish, but if I let them drift through me they stayed. Some were happy, some were sad, but all of them mattered, even the small ones. Rick smiled faintly, almost hidden. That's the secret. The small dreams are often the ones that carry the most weight. A person might dream of flying, but it's their dream of sitting quietly with someone they love that changes their life. Don't forget that. The day moved quietly. They travelled along the river, stopping where the grass bent low to the current. Morty let his body rest, his mind still humming with echoes of the dream. When he closed his eyes for a moment, he felt himself slipping back into that strange horizon. Even awake, he could sense the vibrations of possibility lingering around him, as if dreams had not vanished with the night, but still clung to the edges of the day. At one point, Summer placed her hand over his. "Do you think everyone knows their dreams are shared?" she asked. Morty shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. I think most people believe their dreams belong only to them, but they don't. They spill over, they connect. Even if we never talk about them." Summer smiled softly. "Then maybe that's why they're important. They're like bridges we don't always see." Morty held on to her words, letting them settle inside him. Bridges unseen, yet always there. It felt true. As night returned, Once more, Morty closed his eyes with ease. He no longer feared the drifting weight of dreams. Instead, he welcomed them. He allowed the fabric of unseen stories to fold around him, to carry him gently beyond the edges of the waking world. Again he found himself standing on the shoreline of possibility, the waves bringing whispers, the stars above glowing like unspoken wishes. And in that moment, Morty understood. Dreams were not an escape from life. They were part of it, woven into its very foundation. To listen to them was to honor the quiet voices of the world, the ones too soft to be heard in daylight. He lay in the dream and let it hold him, knowing that tomorrow he would wake again beside the river with summer's quiet warmth and Rick's steady presence. And yet he also knew that the dreams of countless others would be there too, pulsing softly, always waiting to be heard. The river had begun to sound different to Morty. It wasn't louder nor softer, but it carried layers he had never noticed before. The rush of water against stones held not just presence, not just memory, but something that shimmered like the dream he had floated through. When he sat on the bank with his hands resting in the grass, he could almost hear them weaving together. The steady heartbeat of the present moment, the quiet echoes of what had been, and the fragile whispers of what might be. It was as though the river itself carried all three at once, blending them into a song without beginning or end. Rick had noticed his silence. He crouched beside him, his coat brushing the earth, and asked, without looking at Morty, "What do?" "You hear now?" Morty took his time to answer, watching the surface ripple. "It's like the now, the past, and the maybe are all together."
Like the river doesn't care about which is which, it just carries them. Rick gave a small grunt that was half approval, half fatigue. That's how it works, Morty. You're starting to understand. Memory, presence, dreams, they're not separate streams.
They're one current. Most people can't hear it. They cling to one and ignore the others. That's why they stumble. Morty glanced up at him. And what happens if you listen to all of them? Rick's eyes softened, shadows of starlight glinting across his face. Then you begin to live in harmony with it. Doesn't mean life gets easier, but it becomes deeper, it becomes whole. Summer had been lying nearby, staring at the fading light of the sky. She rolled onto her side, her hair brushing her cheek. "So it's like a song," she said quietly. "And we're part of it, even when we don't realize it." Rick gave her a rare, unguarded nod. "Exactly. And the trick is not to force yourself to control the song. It's to learn to hum along." That night, Morty let the lesson sink into him. When sleep came, he dreamed again, but the dream was not separate from the day. He could feel presence holding him, memory brushing against him, and possibility flickering at the edges. They were not three paths but one, winding together like a braid. In the dream, Morty stood on a hill. Around him were three figures, one cloaked in echoes, one shining with light, and one made of shifting shadows. Yet, as he reached toward them, they stepped closer to one another until they were no
Longer separate.
They melted into a single figure, faceless and infinite, humming a tune he knew he had always heard, but never truly listened to. When Morty awoke, dawn was just beginning to paint the sky. He felt calm, not because the world was simple, but because it was vast, layered, and connected. He rose, stretching, and found Summer already awake, her knees drawn to her chest. She turned toward him and whispered, "Did you dream again?" Morty nodded. "Yeah, but it didn't feel like just a dream. It felt like everything was blending, like I wasn't supposed to separate them anymore. She reached for his hand, holding it gently. Maybe that's what growing is.
Learning to stop dividing things that were always one. Rick stirred, pretending not to listen, though Morty knew he heard every word. He muttered, "The two of you are catching on faster than most. Don't lose it." The day carried them into
the woods again. Morty found himself drawn to a tree he had touched before. He pressed his palm to its trunk, closing his eyes. At first, he felt the slow rhythm of presence, the steady pulse of life flowing upward through the bark. Beneath that, he felt memory, the cycles of seasons, storms, and sunlight etched in the rings. And then, almost hidden, he felt dreams. The tree's quiet yearning to keep growing, to reach more light, to continue. Presence, memory, dream, all there, braided together. Morty breathed deeply and whispered, "I hear you." The tree, silent as always, seemed to lean slightly toward him, its branches rustling though no wind stirred. Morty opened his eyes and smiled faintly. He had no doubt anymore that everything around him was alive in ways he had never understood. Later, they reached the edge of a meadow where wildflowers bent in the breeze. Summer lay down in the tall grass, staring at the drifting clouds above. Morty joined her, and together they listened to the gentle hum around them. He closed his eyes and tried something new. Instead of listening to only one thread, he opened himself to all of them at once. He felt the present moment, the warmth of the sun, the scent of grass. He felt memory, the countless blooms that had risen and fallen before this one. And he felt dream, the seeds waiting to scatter, to grow, to become new life. At first, it was overwhelming. Too many layers at once, but then he let go of trying to hold them and simply allowed them to exist together. Slowly, harmony emerged. It was not a sharp sound, but a soft chord, the kind that could linger endlessly without growing old. Morty felt tears slip from his eyes, though he didn't know if they were from sadness or joy. Summer noticed, squeezing his hand. "Does it hurt?" she asked softly. "No," Morty whispered. "It's just a lot. But it feels right." Rick stood nearby, his shadow long in the meadow light. He watched them, a small smile hidden in the creases of his face. For once, he didn't interrupt. He let them stay there, resting in the harmony, until the sky began to turn gold. As twilight approached, they returned to the river. Morty watched the water swirl, seeing in it not just a reflection of his face, but the blending of all he had learned. The current held presence, carrying what was here and now. It held memory, rolling over stones that had been shaped by centuries. And it held dreams, rushing onward to places unseen. The river did not choose between them. It carried them all, and in that carrying, it was whole. Rick finally spoke, his voice low and steady. "Morty, what you're learning isn't just about listening, it's about being. When you live with all three threads together, you stop being, torn apart by what's gone, what is, or what might be. You become part of the braid. And when you do, the world itself hums with you." Morty nodded, letting the words sink in. He didn't try to answer. He only listened to Rick, to the river, to the hum that had become a constant companion in his chest. When night fell, Summer began to hum again, the same wordless tune she always did. This time, Morty hummed with her. Their voices blended, not perfectly but gently weaving together. Rick didn't join, but he sat close, and his silence felt like another note in the chord. Morty closed his eyes and felt presence, memory, and dream move through him, no longer separate, no longer clashing, but resting in one another like stars scattered in the same sky. And as sleep carried him into its arms, Morty understood that harmony wasn't something to be reached. It was always here, waiting as long as he opened himself to it. The days began to move differently for Morty after he carried harmony inside him. The sun rose the same way, the river flowed as it always had, and the trees whispered with their patient voices, yet something in the air had changed. It was not the world itself, but the way Morty felt within it. He no longer separated what was happening, what had happened, and what might come. He let them drift through him together, and the world seemed to respond in quiet ways. When he walked through the square again, he noticed how people's eyes softened when they looked at him. They didn't know why, but they lingered near him, as if the calm he carried was a shelter they wanted to step into. Morty did not speak much, but when he did, his words seemed to land gently, as though the harmony in him lent them a weight that soothed rather than pressed. One afternoon, as he sat on the edge of the fountain, a child approached him. She carried. No toy, no parent nearby, just wide, searching eyes. She didn't say anything. She only stood in front of him, staring. Morty felt her quiet curiosity, her longing for safety, her memory of laughter mixed with the faint ache of something missing. He didn't know her story, but he felt its vibration. So he simply smiled, not too wide, not too small, but enough to let her know he saw her. The child smiled back and then skipped away, as though something had been lifted. Morty exhaled, realizing he had said nothing, yet something had passed between them all the same. Summer noticed. She sat beside him, watching the child vanish into the crowd. "You didn't do anything, and still she changed," she said softly. Morty shrugged, a little uncertain. "I think maybe it's not about doing. Maybe it's just about being. If you carry calm, maybe others feel it too." Rick stood behind them, arms crossed, his usual scowl in place, but his eyes betrayed a flicker of pride. "That's what most people never get, Morty. They think change comes from loud voices, big actions, and noise. But sometimes it's the quiet harmony that shifts the world, even if nobody notices." They walked further through town. Morty felt how every interaction carried a vibration, even the smallest. When a man brushed past him, muttering under his breath, Morty felt the weight of tiredness pressing on the man's shoulders. He didn't take it personally. Instead, he let the harmony in him remain steady. And for a moment, the man turned back with a puzzled expression, as if surprised by the calm he had brushed against. Morty didn't say anything. He simply kept walking, the hum inside him unbroken. Later, Summer asked, "Doesn't it get heavy, feeling all of that?" Morty
Thought for a while. It used to, but now it feels lighter because I don't have to fix it.
"I just let it pass through me like the river carries everything without choosing." That evening, they returned to the meadow. The sky was turning violet, and the first stars blinked awake. Morty lay in the grass, closing his eyes. He felt the harmony within him, blending presence, memory, and dream. Then he opened himself outward, letting that harmony touch the meadow. He didn't force anything. He only rested in it. The flowers seemed to lean toward him. The breeze softened, and even the insects' hum quieted for a moment, as if the world had settled into the same chord. Summer rested beside him, whispering,
I can feel it too. It's like the air itself is humming. Morty smiled faintly. Maybe it's not me. Maybe the world is always humming. I'm just finally hearing it. Rick let out a low chuckle. You're catching on, Morty. The world
Doesn't need you to carry it, it just needs you not to resist it. When you live in harmony, you remind others of what's already there. Morty thought of the child in the square, of the man brushing past, of Summer's soft laughter. He realized harmony wasn't something to spread like a message. It was something to live, and in living it, others felt it without needing explanation. As
night deepened, Morty dreamed again. He found himself walking through a village filled with lanterns. Each lantern glowed with a different light, some bright, some dim, some flickering, as though uncertain of their flame.
Morty understood they were people's inner lives, their quiet hopes and burdens. He walked slowly, not touching them, only passing by. But as he moved, his own light seemed to glow a little stronger, and the lanterns nearest to him steadied, their flames becoming more certain. Morty did not try to change them. He only carried his own flame with steadiness, and somehow it made the others steadier too. When he awoke, he felt no separation between dream and waking. The lesson was clear, gentle as dawn. Harmony is not shouted into the world. It is lived, quietly, and the world notices in its own time. The next day, Morty sat by the river again. Summer joined him, silent but present. Together they watched the water carry everything away and bring everything back. Rick stood close, tinkering with something in his pocket, but Morty felt his gaze resting on them from time to time. They did not speak much, but the silence between them was not empty. It was full, carrying presence, memory, and dream all braided together. A bird landed near the water's edge, dipping its beak and then lifting into the air. Morty followed it with his eyes, feeling how even its small flight carried harmony. He smiled, breathing in the cool air, and whispered to himself,
It's all connected.
Even the smallest part. Summer leaned against him, her voice barely more than a breath. And when you carry it, you remind others to carry it too. Morty nodded, closing his eyes. He didn't need to add anything more. The river spoke, the trees hummed, the sky stretched wide above, and in that stillness Morty felt the quiet truth. Harmony was not his to own. It was already here, everywhere, waiting to be remembered, and so he let himself rest, knowing the world hummed with him, and he hummed with the world, each shaping the other in silence. Morty woke with the faint memory of a dream that lingered like morning mist. In it he had stood in a hall of mirrors, each one reflecting not his face, but the faces of strangers, some smiling, some grieving, some too tired to look up. He had walked through them quietly, feeling each reflection brush against him like a ripple on water. When he opened his eyes to the waking world, the echoes of their sorrow still clung to him, not heavy, but soft and persistent, like the weight of a hand resting gently on his shoulder. He sat up, noticing Summer still asleep beside the riverbank, her breathing even, her hand curled lightly in the grass. Rick was awake, fiddling with some small piece of machinery, though even he seemed slower in the early light. Morty stretched his arms and let the air move through him. He had carried harmony for a while now, and yet it was beginning to show him not only the peace people longed for, but also the sadness they quietly hid. When the villagers walked past him that day, Morty felt more than before. A baker carrying bread smiled politely, but Morty sensed the ache behind his eyes, the tiredness of too many mornings that felt the same. A woman tending to her child hummed softly, but Morty caught the thin thread of worry woven into her melody. Even in summer, who laughed freely, Morty sometimes felt the undercurrent of a longing she did not voice. He did not want to intrude. He knew sadness was as natural as the river's shadow. Yet he wondered how to hold it without letting it sink him. Later, as the three of them wandered through the market, a man selling fruit stumbled, his basket spilling across the stones. Morty bent to help him gather the apples. Their hands brushed, and in that instant Morty felt the man's loneliness, sharp and raw like an unspoken word. Morty's chest tightened, not with pity, but with recognition. He looked up at the man, who avoided his gaze, embarrassed by the spill. Morty only smiled gently and placed the last apple back into his basket. "It's okay," he whispered, though he meant more than the apples. The man paused, surprised, then gave a small nod. His shoulders eased ever so slightly before he turned back to his stall. Morty exhaled. It was enough. That night, as the three of them sat beneath the stars, Morty asked, "Rick, what do you do with other people's sadness? I feel it now."
It's everywhere. I don't want to drown in it. Rick looked up from his drink, his expression unusually thoughtful. You don't fix it, Morty. That's the mistake most people make. They think every sadness needs an answer.
But sadness isn't always a problem. Sometimes it's just a companion. You hold it gently, like you'd hold a bird. Not too tight, not too loose. Let it rest, then let it fly. Summer listened, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "It sounds
hard," she murmured. Rick shrugged. "It is. But the alternative is closing yourself off, and that's harder in the long run." Morty lay back in the grass, watching the stars.
He imagined each one as a memory of someone's sadness, burning quietly, but still part of the sky's beauty. Maybe sadness didn't need to be erased. Maybe it was another note in the harmony he was learning to carry. In the days that followed, Morty practiced this quiet holding. When he felt sadness from someone passing, he didn't try to take it from them or push it away. He simply let it move through him like wind through leaves. Sometimes it hurt, a brief ache in his chest, a heaviness in his throat, but it always passed. And afterward, he noticed that the people around him seemed a little lighter, even if they didn't know why. One evening, a girl approached him at the river's edge. She looked no older than he had been when this journey began. Her hair tangled, her eyes swollen from crying. She didn't speak. She only sat near him, staring at the water. Morty felt her sorrow before she even moved. It was raw, jagged, the kind that seemed too big for her small frame. He didn't ask what had happened. He didn't offer comfort in words. Instead, he sat in silence, letting his calm presence steady the space between them. After a long while, the girl whispered, "It hurts." Morty turned his head slightly toward her. "Yeah," he said softly. "It does." The girl nodded, tears falling again, but she did not seem as alone. She leaned a little closer, resting her shoulder near his. They sat like that until the stars deepened and the night air cooled. When she finally rose to leave, she whispered, "Thank you." Morty only nodded, watching her disappear into the dark. He knew her sorrow hadn't vanished, but perhaps she now carried it differently. That night, Morty dreamed again of the lanterns. This time, some flickered with shadows, sadness woven into their glow. Morty walked among them, not afraid. He touched none of them, but his own light seemed steady enough that even the flickering lanterns calmed a little in his presence. He realized then that harmony was not only peace and joy. It was also the gentle space to hold sorrow without fear. When he told Summer about the dream, she touched his hand. Maybe sadness is part of harmony too. Like the low notes in a song. Without them, the melody wouldn't be complete. Rick, overhearing, muttered, "Kids finally learning what most people spend a lifetime running from. Pain doesn't break the world, it tunes it." Morty thought about that as they walked. He remembered his own younger self, frightened by
loneliness, confusion, and the weight of things he couldn't name. If someone had sat quietly beside him then, not fixing, not judging, just being, maybe he would have felt less lost.
Maybe now he could be that presence for others. Days blended into nights, and Morty grew accustomed to carrying both peace and sorrow. The two braided together not in conflict but in quiet balance. He found that when he allowed sadness to exist, without resistance, it softened like snow melting under the sun. People still carried their own burdens, but in his presence, those burdens seemed less sharp, as though harmony had room enough for them all. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Morty stood at the river once more. He closed his eyes, listening. He felt the laughter of children nearby, the weariness of workers returning home, the private sorrows tucked away in quiet hearts. He felt them all, and instead of drowning, he floated within them, letting them weave into the greater hum of life. It was not perfect, not painless, but it was whole. And as the stars appeared one by one, Morty whispered to the night, "It's okay, I can carry both." The river answered with its endless song, and Morty rested in that harmony, knowing he had stepped into a deeper understanding of what it meant to be alive, not to erase sadness, but to let it breathe within the music of everything else. The air had shifted. Morty felt it as soon as he woke. The meadow that had once seemed endless and open now carried the faint ache of change, like a song reaching its final verse. The grass bent differently in the wind, the river sounded slower, and the stars at night felt as though they leaned in, closer, watching with more intent. Morty lay on his back in the quiet, sensing the world's gentle reminder. Nothing stays, not even harmony, in its purest form. At first, he resisted the thought. He had only just begun to understand how to carry both peace and sadness, how to let them rest together without pushing one away. The idea of letting go, of release, unsettled him. Why release something that felt whole? But the longer he listened, the more he realized the world was not asking him to abandon what he carried. It was asking him to trust that even the things he held most carefully would eventually drift beyond him. He thought of the child in the square, the girl at the river, the strangers whose quiet sorrows had brushed against him. He wondered if they, too, had felt the truth of release, that to keep walking, one had to let some of the weight fall back into the river. The thought made his chest tighten, but beneath the ache was a strange kind of gentleness, as though the world itself was whispering, "It's all right to let go." Rick noticed the quiet in him. That evening, as they sat near the fire, Rick spoke without looking up. "You're learning the hardest part, Morty. People think carrying is the challenge, but it's not. The real challenge is putting things down without guilt." Summer leaned into the glow of the flames, her expression soft but pensive. "Letting go feels like losing," she said. Rick shook his head. "Only if you confuse holding with owning. You don't own what you carry, you just borrow it until it's time to give it back." Morty listened, unsure if he fully understood. But something in the words struck deep, like stones settling at the bottom of a lake. The next morning, Morty sat alone by the river, trying to feel what release might mean. He closed his eyes and let the sadness of the villagers drift through him as it always did. But this time, instead of holding it close, he imagined placing it gently onto the water, watching as the river carried it downstream. He did not force it. He did not turn away. He only trusted the current. To his surprise, the sorrow did not vanish. It shimmered, transformed into something softer, something lighter, before slipping away into the distance. He tried the same. With his own memories, the loneliness of childhood, the confusion of not understanding himself, the fear of disappointing Rick, the longing for someone to stay. He placed them one by one on the river's surface, not to forget them, but to release their weight. Some drifted easily, others clung to him, asking for another moment. Morty let them rest, then slowly set them free, watching the river take them. His chest ached, but when he opened his eyes, he felt clearer, as though more space had been made inside him. Later that day, Summer noticed. "You look different," she said softly. "Lighter." Morty smiled faintly. "I think I let the river hold what I couldn't anymore." Summer's eyes softened, and she took his hand. "Maybe that's
What we're all supposed to do. None of us can hold everything forever. Forever.
That night, Morty dreamed again. He stood in the lantern village, but this time some lanterns rose slowly into the sky, drifting upward until they disappeared among the stars. At first, he panicked. What if their lights went out? What if he lost them forever? But then he noticed the stars glowing brighter as the lanterns reached them, their light not gone, but joined to something vaster. Morty woke with tears in his eyes, but also a quiet calm. Release was not loss. It was a return. Days passed, and Morty practiced release each time he felt the weight of others. When a villager brushed past him with anger, Morty let the heat flow through him and then drift away. When he sensed sadness in Summer, he sat beside her until she laughed softly again, then released the ache into the night sky. When Rick muttered bitter truths that carried loneliness beneath them, Morty listened, held the weight for a moment, then set it gently back down, trusting Rick's own path. It wasn't always easy. Sometimes he wanted to cling, especially to Summer's laughter, to the rare softness in Rick's eyes, to the fleeting moments of wholeness he found in the meadow. But he began to see that release didn't mean those things ended. It meant they lived more fully by not being forced to stay. One evening, Morty stood by the river as the sun sank into gold. He whispered softly to himself, "I don't need to keep it all. I only need to love it while it's here." The river answered with its endless song. Summer came to stand beside him, following his gaze across the glowing water. "Do you ever feel scared?" she asked quietly. "That if you let go of too much, there won't be anything left?" Morty thought for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "No. I think what's left is space. And space is where new things can grow." Rick, who had been listening from a distance, smirked faintly but said nothing. For once, his silence felt like agreement. That night, the stars seemed closer than ever. Morty lay in the grass, eyes half closed, listening to the world breathe. He felt the peace of release wrapping around him, not as emptiness, but as a quiet
Fullness. It was the fullness of knowing that nothing had to be held forever, that love was not weakened by letting go.
And that harmony was as much about space as it was about sound. As he drifted toward sleep, Morty whispered to the sky, Thank you for teaching me to release." His voice was barely a breath, but in his heart he felt the universe nodding back, a vast and gentle presence reminding him that nothing is ever truly gone. It only changes form. And with that thought, Morty surrendered to sleep, his dreams already loosening their edges, ready to carry him somewhere new. Morty had grown used to the rhythm of the meadow and the river, the way the days stretched open and the nights folded quietly around them. But now he sensed a new current moving beneath everything, subtle yet undeniable. It was the feeling of parting, not as an abrupt break, but as a gentle tide pulling toward the sea. Even the air carried it. When he breathed, he felt the whisper of change resting on his chest. He tried not to think of it at first. He wanted to stay in the comfort of what he knew, the steady hum inside him, Summer's presence close by, Rick's quiet guidance that appeared when least expected. Yet the river reminded him each day that nothing remains still. Its waters flowed, carrying leaves and branches, carrying reflections that shimmered for a moment and then vanished downstream. Morty began to realize that release was not just about letting go of sorrow. Sometimes it was about letting go of moments themselves, even the beautiful ones. One afternoon, he and Summer wandered through the village together. The market was alive with voices and colors, people moving with baskets in their arms and songs on their lips. Summer bought a small piece of bread, and they shared it as they walked. Morty watched the way she laughed when crumbs fell onto her sleeve, and he felt a wave of warmth so deep it almost hurt. A quiet thought rose in him, one he did not want to face. One day, even this laughter would be a memory. That night, when the three of them sat by the fire, Morty asked in a low voice, "Rick, how do you say goodbye to something you don't want to lose?" Rick stared into the flames, his face unreadable. After a long pause, he said, "You don't fight the goodbye, you thank it. Gratitude makes the leaving softer." Morty frowned slightly. "But it still hurts," Rick nodded. "Of course it does. That's the proof you loved it." Summer leaned closer to Morty, her shoulder brushing his. "Maybe goodbyes aren't endings. Maybe they're like lanterns drifting upward. You can't hold them anymore, but you can watch the sky glow brighter because of them." Morty thought of his dream of lanterns and felt her words settle into place like puzzle pieces fitting together. In the days that followed, Morty began to notice small partings everywhere, a child releasing a kite after the string snapped, laughing. Even as it vanished into the clouds, a villager closing his stall at dusk, the day's work folded into memory. Even the sun itself, bowing each evening beyond the horizon, seemed to whisper, "See you again." None of these departures felt like losses. They felt like rhythms necessary for the song to continue. One evening, as the sky dimmed into blue, Summer sat beside Morty at the river's edge. She was quieter than usual, her gaze fixed on the current. After a long silence, she said, "Do you ever wonder if we'll go separate ways someday?" Morty's chest tightened, but he did not turn away. He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I think about it." She drew a small circle in the dirt with her fingertip. "It scares me sometimes, but also, maybe it's okay. Maybe the fact that we shared this time means it doesn't have to last forever to matter." Morty felt her words press against the quiet truth he had been carrying. He placed his hand over hers, stopping the circle she was drawing. "If it happens," he whispered, "I'll be grateful for every moment, even the ones that hurt." Her eyes softened, and she leaned her head against his shoulder.
They didn't speak again, but the silence between them felt alive with meaning. That night, Morty dreamed differently.
He walked along the riverbank, and instead of lanterns, he saw paper boats drifting downstream. Each boat carried something small, a shared glance, a memory of holding hands. He reached to grab one, but the current pulled it away. He wanted to chase it, but his feet stayed rooted in place. Then he realized the boats weren't meant to be kept. They were meant to journey. Watching them drift was part of loving them. When he awoke, tears traced down his cheeks, but he smiled faintly. He understood. Goodbyes were not thefts. They were
offerings. Rick noticed Morty's change that morning. "You finally get it, huh?" he said, sipping from his flask. Morty nodded. "I think so. Goodbyes don't take away. They give you the chance to be thankful."
Rick's eyes narrowed, but there was a softness hidden in them. "Took me a long time to learn that, Morty. Don't forget it." The three of them continued their journey, though Morty carried the quiet awareness that every step forward was also a step away from something. Instead of fearing it, he let himself savor each moment more deeply. He noticed the warmth of sunlight on his arms, the way summer's hair caught the wind, the rare sound of Rick's low chuckle when something amused him. All of it precious, all of it temporary. At dusk, Morty sat by himself near the meadow, listening to the crickets. He whispered softly, almost like a prayer. "Thank you for this day. Thank you for every little part of it." The words felt right, like small lanterns of gratitude drifting into the sky. The stars appeared slowly, and Morty imagined each one was a memory someone had once released with love. He lay in the grass, his heart full, knowing that when the time came to say goodbye to moments, to places, to people, he would not fight it. He would let it be what it was, a continuation of the song, another verse in the endless melody of being alive. And with that thought, he drifted to sleep, the meadow, breathing softly around him, the universe above holding his whispered gratitude like a lullaby. Morty woke one morning to the sound of the river, but it felt different. Its voice was the same steady current, yet beneath it he sensed a new message. It wasn't about the world around him this time. It was about him. He sat up slowly, brushing sleep from his eyes, and felt the strange pull of memory. Not of the meadow, not of summer's laughter or Rick's muttered wisdom, but of his younger self, the Morty who had once been frightened, restless, unsure. He closed his eyes and saw him clearly. That boy had squinted nervously at everything, stumbling to keep up, carrying too much confusion to notice the quiet beauty of things. Morty felt a heaviness in his chest, a tenderness that almost hurt. He whispered into the morning air, "I see you. I remember you." Summer stirred nearby, rubbing her eyes, and glanced at him. "You okay?" she asked softly. Morty nodded. "Yeah, just remembering who I used to be." Rick, who had been tinkering with a small device by the fire, didn't look up. "That's good, Morty. Most people don't bother. They try to bury their old selves instead of saying goodbye." Morty tilted his head. "Goodbye?" Rick's voice was calm, almost too calm. "You can't carry every version of yourself forever. Some you keep, some you thank, some you let go. Otherwise you get crowded in your own skin." The words stayed with Morty as the day stretched forward. He walked quietly along the riverbank, feeling the weight of all the versions of himself he had carried. The child afraid of being left behind, the boy ashamed of his smallness, the dreamer who wondered if he was enough. They had shaped him, each one leaving marks on his heart. But now he sensed it was time to let them rest, like old coats hung neatly on a wall. That evening, as twilight touched the meadow, Morty sat alone. He closed his eyes and called forth those versions. Slowly, they came. He saw himself at 7, clutching a toy too tightly. He saw himself at 12, overwhelmed by the noise of the world. He saw himself not long ago, stumbling to find harmony, afraid he would fail. Each face looked back at him, familiar and tender. At first he felt sorrow. He wanted to hold them close, tell them it was all right, that he understood their fear. But then he remembered Rick's words and Summer's wisdom about lanterns and the river's endless flow. Goodbyes did not erase. They completed. So Morty whispered softly to his younger selves, "Thank you. Thank you for carrying me this far. Thank you for your fear, for your longing, for the way you kept moving even when you didn't know how.
I won't forget you, but I don't need to carry you anymore." One by one, those versions of himself seemed to step back. Not disappearing, not vanishing, but fading gently into the air as though they had been released to the stars.
Morty felt tears sliding down his face, but beneath them was lightness. A space had opened inside him, wide and clear. Summer found him there, his cheeks wet with quiet tears. She sat beside him, her hand resting over his. "What did you see?" she asked. "Myself," Morty whispered. "All the selves I used to be." And I said goodbye. She squeezed his hand. "That's brave." Morty shook his head. It just felt necessary, like the river wanted me to let them drift. Rick joined them, lowering himself heavily onto the grass. He didn't meet Morty's gaze, but his voice carried a rare gentleness. "That's the thing, Morty. You're not supposed to stay the same person forever. If you're still carrying the kid you were years ago, you never make room for the person you're meant to become." Morty thought of his dream of paper boats, of lanterns rising into the stars. Maybe even versions of himself were part of that journey, drifting onward, glowing in the distance, part of the sky now. That night he dreamed again. He stood on the banks of a wide lake, calm and endless. Upon the surface floated small reflections of himself at different ages. They looked up at him with tired eyes, hopeful eyes, questioning eyes. Morty bent down and touched the water gently, and the reflections dissolved into ripples, merging with the lake. He whispered into the stillness, "Thank you, rest now." And the lake shimmered with a light that felt like forgiveness. When he woke, he did not feel loss. He felt clarity. His chest was open, his breath steady. He realized that goodbyes to his old selves were not rejections. They were gifts. Each one had carried him to this moment, and now they could rest while he walked forward, unburdened. As they traveled that day, Morty noticed the lightness in his steps. Summer glanced at him, her lips curving into a small smile. "You seem taller," she teased. Morty laughed softly. "Maybe I finally made room inside." Rick raised an eyebrow, muttering, "About time." But his eyes held something warmer than sarcasm. They walked until the sun began to fall, painting the sky in gold. Morty paused to take it in. For the first time, he felt the sunset not as an ending, but as a reminder that everything, even himself, was always shifting. Each day asked him to become new, to let the old fade like light behind the horizon. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply, whispering into the wind, "I'm ready." And for the first time in a long while, he believed it. That
night, Morty lay under the stars, no longer haunted by who he had been, no longer afraid of who he might become.
The sky stretched infinite above him, the river hummed steady beside him, and within him there was only peace. And in that peace he drifted into sleep, ready for whatever the next dawn would carry. The morning arrived with a hush, as though the world itself was pausing to listen. The grass was cool beneath Morty's fingers as he stirred, and the sky carried a tender light, one that seemed less like dawn and more like a promise. He sat quietly for a long moment, listening to the river's soft murmur, feeling the wind tug lightly at his sleeve, and he realized something. He was no longer only carrying himself. The lightness inside him wasn't meant to stay there. It wanted to move outward, to touch others, the way the river touched every stone it passed. Morty turned to Summer, who was still curled in sleep, her breathing slow and even. He thought about all the times she had guided him with laughter, with small words of comfort, with her steady presence. She had given him space to grow, even when he didn't realize it. And now, watching her rest, he felt a stirring inside, a gentle calling to give back. When she woke, Morty didn't speak at first. Instead, he helped her gather her things, offered her berries he had picked earlier, and smiled in a way that carried no weight, only warmth. Summer raised an eyebrow. "You're acting calm," she said, chewing thoughtfully. Morty shrugged. I want today to feel easier for you." Summer tilted her head, searching his eyes, then gave a soft smile. "You're learning?" Rick was already ahead, muttering about circuits and tools, but even he noticed something different in Morty's steps. The boy wasn't dragging behind, wasn't stumbling to keep pace. He walked with a rhythm that seemed to belong to him now, and that rhythm carried a strange steadiness. Rick didn't comment aloud, but Morty caught the faintest hint of pride in his glance, like an ember hidden beneath ash. As they followed the river deeper into the meadowlands, they came across a broken branch lying across the path. Summer reached to move it, but Morty stepped forward first, lifting it easily and setting it aside. He smiled faintly. "You always help me. This time I want to help you." It wasn't just words, it was intention, and Summer felt it. She touched his shoulder lightly, saying nothing, but the silence between them was filled with understanding. Later, as the sun climbed higher, they stopped by a clearing where wildflowers swayed in unison with the breeze. Morty sat cross-legged, plucking a small daisy and holding it gently between his fingers. He watched the petals sway in the faint wind, and something inside whispered again, "Renewal is not yours alone. Share it gently, so others remember their own light." So Morty turned to Summer. "Do you ever feel like you're carrying too much?" he asked softly. Summer blinked, caught off guard by his tone. She thought about it before answering. "Yeah, sometimes. More than I like to admit." Morty nodded. "I used to feel that way all the time, like I had to hold every version of myself, every mistake, every fear. But I learned you don't have to. You can let them go. Like lanterns." Summer's eyes widened slightly. She remembered the lanterns they had once watched drift skyward, glowing softly against the night. She leaned closer. "And when you let them go, what happens?" "You don't lose them," Morty said. "They just stop weighing you down. They become part of the sky instead of your shoulders." For a moment, Summer said nothing. Then she exhaled slowly, as though releasing a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. She closed her eyes and imagined her own burdens, imagined them rising into the sky like lanterns. When she opened her eyes, there was a softness there, a quiet relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Morty smiled, but it wasn't the nervous, uncertain smile he used to wear. It was calm, grounded. "We can remind each other," he said, "so we don't forget." Rick, who had been pretending not to listen as he fiddled with his gadget, gave a low grunt. "Not bad, Morty. Teaching without preaching. That's harder than it looks." They moved on, but something had shifted. The air felt lighter around them, as if even the meadow itself had heard their exchange and decided to join in the release. The flowers seemed brighter, the path less tangled. That evening, when the sun melted into the horizon, Morty found himself staring at the fire. He thought about all the people in the world who carried weight, silently, fears, mistakes, regrets they never shared. He realized he wanted to be someone who could help, not by fixing, not by forcing, but by offering the same gentle reminder he had given Summer, that letting go was possible. That peace wasn't something you stumbled upon, but something you allowed. He turned to Rick. "Do you think it's okay to want to help others like that?" Rick didn't look up right away. His hands moved steadily over wires and metal, his face half shadowed by the firelight. Finally, he sighed. "Morty, the universe doesn't get lighter because you want it to. People won't always listen, some won't be ready, but if you can carry calm without shoving it down their throats, then yeah, that matters." Morty nodded. "So, it's not about changing them?" Rick shook his head. "It's about being steady enough that when they're ready, they know where to look." Morty thought about that long after Rick had gone quiet again. He imagined himself not as a teacher or a savior, but as a lantern on the shore, glowing softly, waiting for others to see the light when they needed it. The thought filled him with peace because it wasn't about control. It was about presence. That night, Morty dreamed once more. He stood in a meadow full of people he didn't know, each holding heavy stones. Their shoulders sagged, their eyes dimmed. Morty didn't rush to take the stones from them. Instead, he lit a small lantern and held it up high. At first, no one noticed. Then slowly, one by one, they began to raise their eyes. Some still clutched their stones, but others set them down, reaching for the light. And Morty realized that was enough. Not all at once, not everyone, but enough. When he awoke, the dream lingered like a song. He rose quietly, stretched, and smiled at the world around him. Summer noticed. "What's got you smiling?" Morty shrugged. "Just thinking about how sometimes the best way to help is just to glow a little. So people know they don't have to stay in the dark." Summer's smile matched his. Rick pretended not to hear, but Morty caught the faint twitch of his mouth, the ghost of approval. And so, with the river's song guiding them, with lanterns of memory floating gently in their hearts, they stepped forward together. Morty carried not just himself now, but a new way of being, one that gave quietly and freely, like light shared without being diminished. The stars blinked awake above them, ancient and steady, as though nodding in agreement. And under their glow, Morty felt certain. Renewal wasn't meant to be kept. It was meant to be shared. The night stretched long and silver, carrying with it the kind of quiet that feels older than memory. Morty lay awake, listening to the slow rhythm of summer's breath, the occasional scratch of Rick's tools against metal, and the distant lull of the river winding its way through the dark. He felt both full and empty, like a vessel holding light, yet unsure of where to pour it. He thought again of the lantern dream and how easy it had seemed there, how naturally the stones had fallen from strangers' hands. But here, in the waking world, people did not always let go so easily. Some clung to their burdens the way a child clings to a blanket, even when it scratches the skin. When morning arrived, Morty felt the truth of it waiting for him. The air had a heaviness to it, not cruel, but instructive, as though the world itself wanted him to practice patience. He rose and joined Rick by the fire, where coffee hissed gently in a dented tin pot. Rick handed him a cup without looking up, a small, wordless offering that Morty accepted gratefully. The steam rose like faint ghosts, carrying the bitter comfort of warmth. Summer stirred soon after, rubbing her eyes. "We going today?" she asked, her voice husky with sleep. Rick nodded. "North Ridge. Old tech scattered in the rocks might be useful." The path was steep, lined with jagged stones that shimmered faintly in the light. Morty stayed close to Summer, watching the way she moved carefully, steady but cautious. He felt the urge to reach out, to guide her, but something told him to wait, to respect the rhythm of her own steps. Sometimes help wasn't lifting the weight for someone. Sometimes it was walking beside them until they chose to set it down themselves. Halfway up, they came across a traveler. He was hunched over, carrying a pack that seemed far too heavy for his thin frame. His breath rattled with each step, and sweat glistened on his brow. Morty's heart pulled toward him instantly. He hurried forward. "Do you need help?" he asked gently. The man shook his head, his eyes sharp with pride. "No, it's mine. I carry it." Morty stepped back, startled by the firmness in his voice. He wanted to insist, to take the pack from his shoulders, but something in the man's gaze stopped him. It wasn't anger, exactly, but a desperate kind of ownership. Morty remembered Rick's words. People won't always be ready. So he nodded slowly. "Okay, but if it ever feels too much, you don't have to carry it alone," the man said. Nothing. He adjusted the strap and kept climbing, leaving Morty with a quiet ache in his chest. Summer touched his arm. "You tried?" she whispered. "Yeah," Morty said softly, "but maybe trying isn't about making it happen. Maybe it's just letting them know they can choose." They reached the ridge by midday, the wind cool and steady against their faces. The rocks glittered with fragments of strange machinery, remnants of worlds long forgotten. Rick bent down eagerly, muttering calculations as he sifted through wires and gears. Summer wandered to the edge, gazing out over the valley below, where the river cut a silver thread through the earth. Morty stayed in the middle, torn between the tinkering of his grandfather and the distant, thoughtful gaze of his sister. As he stood there, he noticed the traveller again, collapsed on a stone a little ways down. His pack had slipped to the ground, and his shoulders sagged in exhaustion. Morty's instinct urged him forward once more. This time, he didn't offer to take the pack. Instead, he sat beside him in silence. For a long while, they just breathed. Together, the wind filling the space where words might have been. Finally, the traveller spoke, his voice cracked. "It's heavy because I don't know who I am without it." Morty listened carefully. He didn't try to solve it, didn't try to reason it away. He simply nodded. "That makes sense," he said softly. "It's scary to put something down when you've carried it so long." The traveller looked at him, surprised. Tears gathered in the corners of his tired eyes.
Most people tell me to just let it go, but no one ever says it's okay to be scared. Morty gave him a faint smile. "I'm scared too sometimes." of letting go, of moving forward. But maybe it's not about doing it all at once. Maybe
It's about sitting with the weight until one day you feel ready to loosen your grip. The traveller's hand twitched, brushing the strap of his pack. He didn't release it, but he didn't clutch it as tightly either. A breath escaped him, shaky but lighter.
maybe.
He whispered. They sat together until the sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the stones. When Morty finally stood, the traveller remained behind, his hand still resting on the pack, but his posture less burdened. Morty didn't need to see the end of his journey. It was enough to know a seed had been planted. Back at camp that evening, Summer asked what had happened. Morty told her quietly about the man and his words. Summer listened, nodding. "So patience isn't waiting for people to change," she said slowly. "It's standing with them until they want to." Morty felt the truth of her words settle deep inside him. Patience wasn't passive, it was active presence, steady and gentle, like the river flowing no matter how many stones it touched. Rick, who had been fiddling with a new contraption, snorted. "Patience isn't exactly our family's strongest trait," he muttered. But when Morty looked at him, he saw something softer in his grandfather's eyes, something like recognition. That night, Morty lay under the stars, thinking about the traveller and the pack, about the lanterns in his dream. He realized the lanterns didn't float because he commanded them to. They rose because people chose to release them. His role wasn't to pry open clenched fists, but to hold a light steady until someone was ready to look up. He closed his eyes and breathed deeply. The night pressed gently against him, and he felt a small, peaceful shift. He didn't need to rush. He didn't need to force. The universe moved at its own rhythm, and he was part of it, steady as the stars. In the quiet, Morty whispered to himself, almost like a prayer. "Patience is love that waits without leaving." The words floated into the darkness, and though no one answered, he felt heard. Perhaps by the stars, perhaps by the river, perhaps by some future version of himself. Whatever it was enough. And so he drifted into sleep, not hurried, not restless but calm, like a lantern waiting to be lifted by the night breeze. The night carried with it a sound that wasn't exactly a sound. It was softer than wind, gentler than water, something that seemed to drift through Morty's chest rather than his ears. He lay beneath the stars, eyes closed, and felt it as if it were a hum woven through the dark. It wasn't words, not at first, only a rhythm, a tone of comfort. Slowly, he realized it was memory itself, singing to him. The voices he had heard all his life, blending together in the quiet. The first voice was faint, almost fragile. It was his mother's when he was small, soothing him during nights when sleep would not come. She hadn't sung perfectly, and sometimes she forgot the words halfway through, but she would hum until her breath ran out. That hum returned now, wrapping around him like a blanket. Morty hadn't thought about it in years, and yet it was still inside him, alive as the stars above. Then came Rick's voice, gruff and uneven, but different from his usual muttering. Morty remembered a time when he was scared of lightning as a child, and Rick, distracted but oddly gentle, had explained how thunder worked. He hadn't said it like a bedtime story, but Morty had heard something underneath the science, a reassurance, a reminder that even chaos followed rules. That voice now echoed softly in the hum, turning explanation into lullaby. Other voices followed, like faint notes in a drifting song. Summer's laughter when she teased him, but then pulled him close, the sound of his father stumbling through advice that never quite landed, but still carried love in its awkwardness, the voices of friends whose names blurred now, but whose warmth remained. They formed a chorus of memory, not perfect, not polished, but deeply human. Morty realized then that every voice he had ever loved had left behind a thread. Even if he couldn't hear them in the moment, they had woven themselves into him, quiet, reminders waiting for nights like this. He sat up, letting the hum settle into the air around him. The fire had burned low, and Rick was asleep in his chair, tools still scattered in his lap. Summer lay wrapped in her blanket, her hand tucked beneath her cheek, a faint smile on her lips. Morty watched them both and thought about how their voices had shaped him, not always gently, not always kindly, but deeply. He whispered into the night, as if speaking to the hum itself. "I remember you. I still hear you." The sound didn't answer, but it deepened, as though memory approved. The next morning, Morty carried the echo with him. They walked through a grove where the trees were tall and pale, their trunks bending slightly as though listening. Morty touched the bark and felt the hum vibrating faintly there too, like the world itself was singing back fragments of what it had heard. "Do you ever think," Morty asked quietly, "that the things people say to us never really disappear?" Summer raised an eyebrow. "Like echoes?" "Sort of," Morty said. "Like lullabies that stay inside even when we forget them for a while." Summer thought about it as they walked. "I guess. I still hear Mom telling me to take care of you, even when she's not around." "Sometimes it's annoying," she added with a smile. Morty chuckled. "Yeah, but it's still part of you, right? Like it's in your bones." Rick, trudging ahead, gave a grunt. "Words don't disappear, Morty. They just shift. Some weigh you down, some lift you up. That's why you've got to be careful with them." Morty considered that. He thought about all the words that had been thrown at him in
anger, in frustration, in fear. They lived inside him too. But the lullabies, the laughter, the reassurances, they had stayed just as strong.
Maybe stronger. Later, when they stopped by a small pond, Morty knelt at the edge and let his fingers trail through the water. The ripples spread outward, circles within circles, each one carrying the touch a little farther. He thought about voices. That way, small ripples that went on long after the speaker had fallen silent. He closed his eyes and tried to hum like his mother had once hummed to him. The tune wasn't perfect, but it was steady. Summer turned her head, listening, and her expression softened. "I remember that," she said. "You used to calm down when she did that." Morty nodded. "I didn't realize it stayed with me, but it did. And now it feels like maybe I can pass it on." That evening, when the air cooled and the stars began to gather, Morty tried again. He sat close to the fire and hummed, low and calm. The sound was almost swallowed by the night, but Summer leaned into it, her breathing slowing. Even Rick, though. He didn't comment, closed his eyes for a while, the lines on his forehead easing. Morty felt the hum spread through the campsite like the ripples in the pond. It wasn't grand, wasn't powerful, but it was enough. A voice carried forward, reshaped by memory, received by someone new. As the fire crackled and faded, Morty thought about legacy. Not the kind that came from inventions or battles, but the kind that lived in sound, in memory, in the lullabies we gave each other without even realizing. He thought about how his own voice might someday be part of someone else's chorus, humming softly in the dark when they needed it most. The thought didn't make him nervous. It made him peaceful. He realized he didn't have to know the words, didn't have to sing perfectly. It was the presence, the intention, that stayed behind. When he finally drifted into sleep, he dreamed not of lanterns this time, but of an endless sky filled with voices humming together. They were not loud, and they did not compete. They blended, weaving into one steady note that stretched like light across the horizon. Morty joined them, his hum becoming part of the great chorus, and for the first time he felt what it meant to belong completely, not to a place, not to a role, but to the quiet song of memory itself. He woke with the dawn pressing gently at his eyelids, and though the dream faded, the hum remained. He carried it in his chest, steady as breath, certain that it would be with him always. The morning began with the stillness of paper waiting for ink. Morty sat with his knees drawn close, a scrap of old notebook balanced on them, the edges curled and yellowed from age. He had found it in Rick's bag days earlier, tucked among tools and half-written calculations, and for reasons he couldn't explain, he had kept it. Now, as the fire's ashes smouldered softly, he felt a quiet insistence in his chest, an urge to write. The words did not come easily at first. His pencil hovered, scratched, then paused again. He thought about all the conversations he had wanted to have with Rick, all the moments when the silence between them had carried more weight than the words spoken aloud. He realized then that this letter wasn't just for Rick's eyes, if Rick ever read it at all. It was for himself, a way of placing memory on paper so it could breathe outside of him. He began simply. "Dear Rick," the letters looked small against the page, fragile almost, but he kept going. He wrote about nights when Rick had explained the stars, about afternoons spent trailing after him through endless corridors of strange worlds, about the rare moments when Rick's laughter slipped through his defenses like sunlight through cracked glass. Morty admitted that he hadn't always understood Rick, that sometimes his words had felt sharp, but underneath them he had felt something steady, something like care. He paused, tapping the pencil against his knee. The fire hissed quietly, smoke rising into the pale morning. Morty thought of the lantern dream again, how each voice had joined a chorus. He realized this letter was his own voice added to the song, one Rick might never sing back, but still part of the harmony. He wrote about the hum he had felt in the night, about how voices never truly disappeared, about how even Rick's gruff explanations had softened into lullabies in his memory. He thanked him, not just for what had been given, but for the space to grow, for the silence that had allowed Morty to find his own voice. Then he wrote something that surprised him. "I don't need you to answer this. I just want you to know that I'm listening." The sentence looked plain on the page, but it carried a weight that eased him. He didn't need Rick to be someone he wasn't. He only needed to keep hearing what had always been there beneath the surface. The hum of care, the pulse of presence. Summer wandered over, curious, her hair tangled from sleep. "What are you writing?" she asked softly, crouching beside him. Morty held the paper close for a moment, then lowered it so she could see. She scanned the lines quickly, her face unreadable at first. Then she looked at him with gentle eyes. "That's good, Morty. Sometimes the words we don't say out loud are the ones that need a place most." Morty smiled faintly. "Do you think he'll ever read it?" Summer shrugged. "Maybe. But even if he doesn't, you did. And that matters too. He folded the letter carefully, tucking it into his pocket. He didn't rush to give it to Rick, didn't even decide if he would. The act of writing had already changed something in him. It felt like placing a lantern on the river, not knowing how far it would drift, but knowing it would glow for as long as it needed. Later, as the day unfolded, Rick rummaged through metal parts on the ridge. Morty sat nearby, hands in his pockets, fingers brushing the folded paper. He thought about offering it, but he stayed quiet. He watched Rick work, saw the way his hands moved with purpose, how his eyes narrowed in concentration, how his silence was its own kind of song. Morty realized that perhaps the letter didn't need to leave his pocket just yet. Perhaps it was enough to hold it close, to carry the words like a secret garden. That night, after Summer had fallen asleep, Morty pulled out the letter again. The fire had burned low, and the stars stretched wide above them. He unfolded the paper and read it softly under his breath, almost like a prayer. Rick stirred slightly, glancing over. "What's that you're mumbling, Morty?" Morty froze, then smiled faintly. "Just something I wanted to remember." Rick grunted, already
Half asleep again.
but Morty caught the faintest lift in his brow, as though he knew more than he let on. Morty tucked the letter back into his pocket, warmed not by being understood completely, but by knowing that he had spoken, even if only to the night. In his dream that evening, Morty saw letters floating in the air like drifting leaves. They weren't heavy or sharp, but soft, glowing faintly as they swirled around him. He reached out, and one landed in his palm. It was his own handwriting, words he had written but forgotten. He read them again in the dream and felt them settle deeper inside him, as if repetition itself was healing. When he woke, he no longer felt restless about whether Rick would read his letter. It had already done its work, carving a quiet space inside him where memory and gratitude could rest together. The days that followed carried the same rhythm, walking, resting, small discoveries. Along the way, Morty found himself humming more often, sometimes repeating words from the letter under his breath, sometimes saying nothing at all. Summer teased him gently for it, but she listened too, letting the sound soothe her when silence felt heavy. On the fourth evening, Morty finally set the letter beside Rick's tools while he wasn't looking. He didn't announce it, didn't wait for a reaction. He simply placed it there and walked away, joining Summer by the fire. Rick noticed, of course. He picked up the folded page, frowned at it, and slipped it into his coat without reading it. Then and there. Morty didn't ask, didn't press. The act of offering was enough. That night, as Morty drifted towards sleep, he imagined Rick finding the letter later, maybe weeks from now, maybe never. He imagined him reading it under some quiet sky or not at all. Either way, Morty knew the words were alive. They had been written, and that made them real. The stars blinked above, steady and unchanging, and Morty smiled faintly as his eyes closed. He thought about how letters, like voices, never truly disappeared. They lingered, humming softly in memory, waiting to be heard in their own time. And with that thought, he let go into dreams, his last words a whisper carried only to himself. "I'm listening." The night air was still, carrying only the faint rustle of dry grass, swaying against the earth. Morty lay on his back, eyes tracing the scatter of stars overhead. He felt the hum again, softer than before, but more complete, like the universe. Itself was breathing slowly around him. Each star seemed to pulse in time with that breath, not separate lights in the sky, but threads woven into a single vast cloth. He thought about how easy it was to see them as distant, unreachable points, yet the hum told him otherwise. They were close, connected by lines that could only be felt, not seen. Summer lay beside him, her head tilted toward the same sky. "You ever think," she whispered, "that maybe all of this isn't out there, but in here?" She tapped her chest lightly. "Like the stars are just reminders of something we already carry." Morty considered this. He thought about the letter he had written, how the words had felt both like his own and not his own, as though they had been waiting in him all along. Maybe the stars were like that too, reminders, not instructions. "Yeah," he said softly, "like they're just waiting for us to remember." Rick stirred at the edge of the camp, busy with some small device that blinked faintly in the dark. He didn't interrupt them, but Morty noticed the way he paused sometimes, eyes drifting skyward, before turning back to his work. Morty wondered if Rick heard the hum too, though he'd never admit it. Maybe that was Rick's way of listening. Through silence, through pauses, through the space he left unspoken. The next morning they set off again, following a path that curved gently between low hills. The land was quiet, but not empty. Every rock, every blade of grass, every ripple of wind seemed part of the same slow rhythm. Morty found himself walking in time with it, his steps steady, his breathing calm. Even his thoughts moved slower, not restless as before, but unfolding like pages turned with care. As they walked, Morty remembered something his teacher had once said. "A whisper is just as powerful as a shout if you learn how to hear it." At the time, he hadn't understood. Now he thought about how much of life wasn't about making noise, but about noticing what was already there. The hum wasn't loud, but it didn't need to be. It was everywhere, shaping everything, patient as time itself. When they stopped for rest at midday, Summer found a flat stone and traced patterns on it with her finger, circles within circles. Morty watched her for a while before asking, "What are you drawing?" She smiled faintly. "It's not a drawing. It's more like a reminder." Of what? That nothing ends where it looks like it ends. Every circle opens into another. Morty nodded, feeling the truth of her words, even if he couldn't explain it fully. He thought again of the stars, of the letter, of the lanterns in his dream. Circles within circles, echoes that never really disappeared. That evening, the three of them sat quietly as the fire flickered. Rick adjusted the flame absent-mindedly. Summer leaned against a fallen log, and Morty pulled the folded letter from his pocket once more. He didn't read it aloud, didn't even open it. Just holding it reminded him that words could live beyond their moment. He thought of how many letters had been written across time, carried by rivers, winds, or hands, and how each one had been a voice finding its way into the world. Later, as he drifted towards sleep, Morty felt himself slipping into another dream. This time he was standing in a vast field of light, the ground beneath him soft and endless. The stars were not above but around him, each one glowing gently close enough to touch. He reached out, and instead of burning, the light warmed his palm like a heartbeat. When he pressed his hand against it, he felt not just one story, but many. Laughter, sorrow, questions, and quiet prayers. Each star was not a solitary thing, but a memory. A whisper of someone who had once looked at the sky and wondered the same things he did now. The voices overlapped, not chaotic, but layered, forming something like a song without beginning or end. Morty realized then that the universe wasn't holding secrets, it was holding echoes, and each echo mattered, no matter how small. When he woke, dawn had just begun to soften the horizon. He sat up slowly, feeling the echoes still lingering in his chest. Summer stirred beside him, blinking against the light. Rick was already awake, tinkering again, his face unreadable. Morty almost laughed at how constant Rick's rhythm was, but he held the sound inside, not wanting to disturb the morning's quiet. They continued their journey, the path leading them toward a grove of tall, thin trees that whispered when the wind passed through. Morty closed his eyes as they walked, listening. The sound reminded him of voices in a crowded room, not loud, but overlapping, each one distinct if you paid enough attention. He realized he didn't need to understand them all. Just listening was enough. That night, under those same whispering trees, Morty spoke softly to Summer. I think the universe talks in a language we already know. We just forget sometimes. She tilted her head, curious. And what language is that? He smiled faintly. The one we hear when everything else is quiet. Summer nodded, not pressing further. She leaned back against the tree and closed her eyes, letting the wind carry its own story. Rick joined them briefly, sitting with a sigh heavier than his words. He didn't speak of the letter, didn't mention the hum, didn't name the silence around them. But Morty noticed how he didn't move to leave either. He stayed, his presence alone, adding another thread to the quiet song of the night. Morty realized then that the universe wasn't asking for answers. It was only asking to be noticed, to be carried, to be remembered. Every whisper, every hum, every letter folded and left unread was part of that remembering. The stars above them blinked as though agreeing, their light soft but unyielding. As he lay down, Morty pressed his hand against the earth. It felt warm, steady, alive. He thought about the circles Summer had drawn, about the lanterns, about the stars he had touched in his dream. He whispered softly to no one and everyone at once. I hear you. And for the first time in a long while, he felt the universe whisper back. The night stretched wide and the fire at their camp had dwindled to a soft glow, leaving only red embers breathing in the dark. Morty lay awake, though his eyes were closed, the hum still circling him like a patient tide. Each breath he took seemed to meet it halfway, and for once he didn't try to separate himself from it. He simply floated in the rhythm as though the world had chosen to breathe with him instead of against him. The stars above were still watching, gentle and unhurried, and Morty felt no need to look up to know they were there. Summer shifted nearby, turning in her sleep, murmuring something he couldn't make out. Rick sat a little distance from them, his back against a fallen branch, a flask resting at his side. The glow from a half-finished device flickered in his lap, its light throwing thin lines across his face. He wasn't tinkering with urgency, not like he usually did. His hands moved slowly, almost absent-mindedly, as though each adjustment mattered less than the act of holding something steady in his hands. Morty opened his eyes a little and whispered, "You're not really fixing that, are you?" Rick didn't look up. "Doesn't need fixing," he muttered. "Just doesn't like being forgotten." The words lingered, heavier than they sounded. Morty thought about the letter in his pocket, about the dreams filled with lanterns and stars, about the voices in the hum. Nothing wanted to be forgotten, not even a half-broken invention. He wondered if maybe people weren't so different from Rick's machines, just trying to hum long enough to be remembered. Rick finally set the device down and leaned back, his eyes following a small crack in the night sky where two stars had drifted close together. He didn't say anything more, but Morty felt like he had. Silence was Rick's letter, his way of leaving something unsent but still meant. The next morning, they broke camp and walked toward the horizon, where the ground dipped into a wide valley filled with slow-moving fog. The air was cool and smelled, faintly, of iron and rain. Summer wrapped her arms around herself and sighed, her breath mingling with the mist. Rick led the way, though not with his usual sharpness. He moved more like someone retracing steps he already knew, quiet and deliberate. As they descended, Morty noticed how the fog curled around their ankles, clinging as though it wanted to remember their presence. He thought of all the places they had walked, all the paths left behind. Each step was temporary, yet the earth seemed to hold on to it anyway. Even if no one returned, the memory of the step lingered. At the bottom of the valley, they stopped by a shallow river that whispered,
"Against its stones." Rick sat down without a word, pulled a small notebook from his coat, and flipped through pages filled with scribbles and numbers.
Morty leaned over curiously, expecting formulas, sketches of impossible machines, complicated equations, but between the lines, almost hidden, were small notes, single words, fragments of sentences, dates without context. Morty couldn't make sense of them, but he knew instantly that they weren't calculations. They were something else. "Are those—" Morty began, but his voice faded. Rick closed the notebook quickly and slipped it back inside his coat. "Doesn't matter," he said gruffly, though his voice wasn't harsh. It was tired, almost soft. Morty didn't press. He didn't need to. The truth sat quietly between them. Rick, too, had been writing letters. Maybe not to anyone, maybe not even for himself. Just traces, reminders, whispers caught on paper before they could dissolve. They stayed by the river most of the day, not rushing, not pushing forward. Summer collected stones shaped like hearts and moons, arranging them in a small circle on the bank. Morty skimmed a flat rock across the water, watching the ripples fade into the fog. Rick sat still, his gaze fixed on nothing in particular. For once, the silence between them felt full, not empty. That night, when the fog lifted and the sky opened wide again, Morty lay beneath it, with the hum steady in his chest. He thought about circles within circles, about lanterns floating upward, about letters that never reached their destination, but still mattered. He thought about Rick's notebook, about Summer's stone circle, about his own folded page. Nothing had been wasted. Even the unsent things carried weight. He spoke quietly, not sure if anyone was listening. I think nothing really disappears. It just changes shape. Summer, half asleep, murmured back, like fog into water, water into sky. Rick didn't respond, but Morty caught the faintest sound from him, something between a sigh and a hum, as if he had let himself agree without words. The days that followed blurred gently, each one slower, each step quieter. The journey was no longer about reaching somewhere, but about moving through moments with care. Morty felt himself loosening, his thoughts lighter, his questions less sharp. The hum never left him now. It wasn't outside anymore. It had settled within. One evening, just before the sun fell, Rick handed Morty a small object, smooth, metallic, no larger than a coin. "It doesn't do much," Rick said, avoiding his eyes. "But it'll hold a message. Doesn't matter what kind, just press your thumb here and it'll keep it." Morty turned the object in his hand. It was warm, though. It hadn't been in Rick's pocket long. "Why are you giving me this?" Rick shrugged. "Because not everything gets said out loud doesn't mean it shouldn't exist." Morty felt the weight of the coin, not heavy but undeniable. He thought about what he might leave in it, whether he would use words at all, or simply a pause, a breath.
A hum. Maybe that was enough. He closed his fist around it and nodded, though no words came. Rick seemed to understand anyway. The final night came quietly, without announcement.
They camped beneath a sky clearer than any they had seen before, stars stretched endlessly, lanterns without strings. Summer curled close, her stones arranged carefully by her side. Rick sat with his notebook open, though he didn't write in it this time. Morty lay still, the coin warm in his palm, the hum flowing steady. He thought about everything, the dreams, the whispers, the circles, the echoes. He thought about how small he was and how vast all at once. He thought about never opening his eyes again, not as a loss, but as a way of remembering that the deepest visions are carried inside. His breath slowed, his body softened. He whispered one last time, barely louder than the grass swaying around him. "I hear you." And in the silence that followed, he felt the universe exhale with him. Somewhere, the hum kept going. Somewhere, Rick's notebook lay filled with fragments that would never be explained. Somewhere, Summer's stones still formed a circle on the bank of a river. Somewhere, the coin in Morty's hand held a message too quiet to name. And somewhere, he was still there, resting, listening, remembered. And that's where our story gently comes to rest. Not with noise, not with endings that demand to be solved, but with a quiet breath in the night. Some tales don't close like a door. They drift like lanterns on a still river, carrying their glow as far as your heart allows them to. If you find yourself remembering Morty in the days ahead, let it be not for what he saw, but for what he felt. The hum, the whispers, the quiet certainty that nothing is ever truly forgotten. In your own life, you carry echoes like that too. The soft voices, the overlooked kindnesses, the circles within circles. Let this story be a lullaby you can return to when the world feels too sharp. Let it remind you that rest is not surrender, but a way of remembering yourself. Thank you for sharing this hour with us. Sleep well now. Everything's going to be okay, man. Be okay, man.